Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome back to the second day of the second week of the Human Dimension Implementation Meeting 2019. This is working session 12 on tolerance and non-discrimination, with focus on the rights of persons belonging to national minorities. My name is William Romans. I work as a senior legal advisor to the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities, Ambassador Lamberto Zannier. It's my privilege to return to HDIM to moderate these discussions. I will do my best to ensure that the discussions remain on point and that we all stick within sight of our allotted time slots. It's a 3-hour-long session, which gives 15 minutes for myself as moderator and the introducer. It gives 2 hours and 15 minutes for interventions from the floor, with 15 minutes reserved for right to reply. Today's topic is an important one. Effective participation of persons belonging to national minorities is more than a simple right. It is a principle that also accompanies the implementation of all other rights affecting national minorities. This is partly the reason that the HCNM devoted a specific set of recommendations to this topic, the Lund recommendations, 20 years ago this very month. As High Commissioner Zannier reminded us last week, effective participation of national minorities is not only a human dimension commitment, it is essential for any state with a diverse society that wants to maintain internal cohesion. Our expert introducer will outline effective participation as a norm with a particular focus on how this can be achieved, including with youth participation, as well as other marginalized groups. Participants in this conference will use this opportunity to highlight problems or positive practices, and I will accept general points about effective participation of national minorities, but I do encourage you to focus reference to minority youth or the participation of minority women. I will first introduce our speaker this morning, who will give you the introduction, and after that I'll make a few logistical announcements. I'm really happy to welcome back Dr. Petra Rotter, who is an internationally recognized expert on the rights of persons belonging to national minorities, and also a past veteran of this conference. Dr. Rotter teaches international relations at the University of Ljubljana, and she became well known to our office, the HCNM, through her past presidency of the Advisory Committee of the Framework Convention on National Minorities. The HCNM maintains close relations with many experts, of course, but I think it's fair to say that Dr. Rotter is on our speed dial list. Okay, Petra, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this kind word of introduction, and also I would like to extend my gratitude for the invitation to the High Commissioner and the team to be able again to address this distinguished audience with respect to a very important topic. Your Excellencies, dear participants, without doubt, effective participation is a very important aspect of minority protection. In fact, as has been already mentioned, the effective participation is both a minority right and an underlying principle to ensure access to other minority rights, such as language rights, for example. The very substance of other rights typically has to be determined with effective participation of minorities so that their specific needs can be met. Consequently, the issue of effective minority participation is essential for managing diversity with a view to achieving integrated, cohesive societies, and thus also peace and stability within states and in the region as a whole. However, many states struggle as to how this goal can be achieved. What policies and measures need to be taken to guarantee effective participation and thus access to minority rights to all persons belonging to national minorities, including the youth as well as women, according to their needs and interests. I will discuss three aspects that are very important for the discussion about effective participation of minorities. First, I will talk a little bit about effectiveness of participation, then the importance of intra-community diversity and this being taken into account, and then thirdly, finally, I will focus on some practical issues applicable to minority youth in particular, when it comes, of course, to the field of minority participation. First, on the issue of effectiveness of participation. It is commonly understood and agreed that decisions affecting national minorities should not be taken without minorities being involved in such decision-making. This principle, guaranteeing democratic legitimacy of the decision-making process and of the adopted decisions, has been commonly accepted in the international community and is reflected in key documents with commitments regarding minority rights, including in the OSCE Human Dimension commitments. However, perhaps one of the most difficult issues is the question of how can the will of a minority community be determined. Although national minorities share certain common characteristics, such as language or culture, which justifies their differential treatment in law, this does not mean that all persons belonging to a particular national minority have the same needs, interests, and goals. Quite the opposite is typically the case. Minority participation therefore faces a very difficult puzzle. Minority policies cannot and should not be adopted without minority participation, but minority participation almost necessarily faces the risk of involving only some minorities, some of their representatives, some of their interests, needs, and some of their goals, but not all of them. It is therefore clear that effective minority representation does not involve only a political elite of a certain minority or one segment of the minority and leaving out all others. Effective minority participation is inclusive, both in terms of different interests and needs, and by implication, also in terms of different segments of the minority population, including the youth. This brings me to my second issue, the significance of intra-group diversity in implementing minority rights commitments and norms. Like the dominant majorities, also minorities are communities composed of different individuals with different needs, and this needs to be borne in mind. They are diverse in terms of age, gender, socioeconomic factors, rural-urban settlements, but also in terms of professional and personal interests. If these are not taken into account, inequality and discrimination can occur based on affiliation with a minority and additionally based on gender or age or both. Importantly, however, not all minority women, for example, and all minority youth share the same interests or have the same needs. State policies or any discussion about ensuring effective participation of minorities therefore has to take such intra-group and interpersonal differences into account and ensure the broadest possible and meaningful consultation process. Whereas political minority representation, including in national parliaments, is very important, it is by no means sufficient to guarantee effective participation of the entire array of needs through typically one or just a few minority representatives. An inclusive approach to minority participation that thus needs to be broader. The elderly, for example, have different needs. For them, overcoming any language barriers in the health sector may be crucial, and their access to information may depend on the traditional media in minority languages. Similarly, minority youth is one such segment that cannot be and should not be overlooked, although youth are today frequently marginalized in this context. Furthermore, women, including minority youth women, have specific needs as young persons, as women, and as persons belonging to national minorities. It is therefore crucial to take into account both the intra-community diversity and the multiple identities and affiliations of individuals, which are both dynamic and situational. All these provides a framework for designing policies and legislative frameworks that will be based on effective participatory consultation and decision-making processes. And this brings me to my third and last issue on problems faced by minority youth on issues to be taken into account whilst designing policies on effective minority participation. And I'd like to focus just on 4 aspects of this broad topic. Firstly, the broad and inclusive decision-making process should not apply to the political decision-making alone. Instead, the broader civil society needs to be involved, and states should avoid scapegoating civil society as a political opponent that seeks to undermine their stability. As the 2018 UN study on the missing piece, which is following the UN Security Council Resolution 2250 from 2015 notes, and I quote, "Concerns about youth and violent extremism result in policy responses that denigrate and often repress the legitimate participation of youth in political processes, social movements, peaceful protest, and expressions of dissent," end of quote. Needless to say, this poses an obstacle to effective participation of the youth through broader civil society avenues. Such views may further cement not just the so-called minority problem, which is something I spoke about last year at this occasion. So the perception that minorities are viewed as a problem by states and the dominant majority communities, unwilling or unable to manage diversity in a way that promotes equality and social integration, and therefore peace and stability. But also the myth, as the UN study notes, that the youth, also the minority youth, is prone to radicalization and violent unrest. In fact, various socio-economic circumstances play a greater role than age itself. Consequently, states should ensure minority participation not just in public affairs or even merely in political decision-making, but in the broader areas of culture and socio-economic affairs. For effective minority participation and thus effective access to minority rights that will address the needs and interests of persons belonging to national minorities can only be achieved when it is applicable to all walks of life. Political participation through an elected Roma representative, for example, will be an important, but certainly not a sufficient step without guaranteeing also their socio-economic empowerment based on meaningful participation in the socio-economic field. Similarly, an election of a female minority representative may be an important symbolic milestone, but to address the specific needs of minority women, a gender perspective needs to be taken as an overall approach to diversity management through minority rights. Secondly, similarly, the potential of youth in promoting peace and security, as recognized by the OSCE participating states at several occasions, as well as by the UN, quick, monodimensional approaches are insufficient. For sure, youth participation through various avenues needs to be encouraged, supported, and their demands as well as proposals listened to and taken into account. However, good training to this effect is needed for young community leaders, male and female, as democratic, transparent, and inclusive participation also requires appropriate skills. Importantly, states and their mainstream political parties, as well as possibly neighboring kin states, should avoid co-opting minority youth in this respect. They should allow the development of their independent participation also in a broader civil society. And very briefly, to a very short last point, additionally, so thirdly, access to quality education for all has to be ensured. That is education that seeks to develop the full potential of every student according to his or her needs and abilities, whilst respecting human rights and fundamental freedoms of all, and enabling free expression and promotion of different ethnic identities of individuals as part and parcel of integrated societies. These goals have to be internalized by all members of diverse societies, including those affiliating with the majority community. It is in such circumstances that the full potential of the youth as bridge builders in conflict management can be achieved. Fourthly and lastly, in addition to education, employment opportunities are important, including for young persons belonging to national minorities in the public sector. In conclusion, effective participation of minorities, including the youth and women, whose crucial role in guaranteeing peace should not be overlooked, is not a matter of minorities alone. On the contrary, the broad society, the majority community, and persons belonging to it need to understand the significance of equality, the characteristics of an integrated society in which minorities are viewed and recognized as an equal and equally valued part of such societies. and the significance of effective, meaningful, and inclusive participation of everyone in all walks of life. I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Petra, thank you very much. That's given us a lot of food for thought and discussions. Noting particularly from our office that decisions affecting persons belonging to national minorities should not be taken without involving them in the process. This is particularly important. And also that to bear in mind that effective participation is broader than political participation alone. With that, I have a few logistical announcements, which I suppose you might have heard before. The speakers list is behind me. It is currently full with 50 names. Please respect the seating arrangements according to the signs which have been placed around the room. This session will be live streamed, otherwise filming of individuals without their permission is not allowed. In the interests of a genuine discussion, we encourage you not to read from pre-prepared statements, though since I do realize this is occasionally unavoidable, we do have the possibility also to submit those statements to the interpreters in advance to allow for everybody's better understanding, and also to the documents distribution system, which I suppose by this stage you have become acquainted with. I would like to remind participants that they can only speak in the capacity in which they are registered, and only entities registered on the speakers list can take the floor. And also to remind representatives of participating states that points of order can only relate to procedural issues. When it comes to the substance of the matter under discussion, you're welcome to use your right of reply for that matter. If there are any other rules which I forgot to mention, please don't assume that will buy you any leniency. As moderator, I aim to ensure that this session is conducted in an orderly and respectful manner. Criticism is absolutely acceptable, but I would appreciate if you could assist me to keep the tone constructive. There will be 2 minutes and 30 seconds for each intervention. On my list, first it will be Netherlands on behalf of the EU, followed by the Democratic Union of the Greek Minority, followed by the Constantinopolitan Society. Netherlands on behalf of the EU, the floor is yours.
Mr. Moderator, thank you very much. The following states align to this statement: Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Georgia, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Moldova, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. I am honored to speak on behalf of the European Union. The European Union strongly believes that protection of human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to national minorities, is crucial for maintaining regional peace and stability. The rights of persons belonging to national minorities are an important aspect of our cooperation with all our partner countries, including our closest neighbors, and are consistently raised in our political and human rights dialogues. Within the EU, Article 21 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights prohibits discrimination on any ground, including membership of a minority group. This protection is bolstered by EU directives tackling discrimination. The EU remains committed to ensuring the rights already exercised by persons belonging to national minorities as enshrined in the applicable UN, Council of Europe conventions and related protocols, and in OSCE commitments on non-discrimination and respect for diversity. Also, the EU adopted in March 2019 the EU Human Rights Guidelines on non-discrimination in external action. We reiterate that persons belonging to national minorities should be able to exercise fully and effectively their human rights and fundamental freedoms without discrimination in full equality before the law. We reiterate the importance of an effective implementation of legislation on the protection of human rights, including those of persons belonging to national minorities, and their non-discriminatory treatment throughout the territory of participating states. We consider the office and the mandate of the High Commissioner on National Minorities to be of the utmost importance for the OSCE concept of comprehensive security. This autonomous institution is and should remain a core conflict prevention instrument for the whole OSCE area. Finally, already the Copenhagen document underlined that participating states will respect the right of persons belonging to national minorities to effective participation in public affairs, including participation in the affairs relating to the protection and promotion of the identity of such minorities. The Lund recommendations on the effective participation of national minorities in public life build upon this. It highlights that effective participation of national minorities in public life is an essential component of a peaceful and democratic society. Therefore, it is essential to strengthen the role of persons belonging to national minorities, including youth and women. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representative speaking on behalf of the EU. Next on my list, I have the Democratic Union of the Greek Minority. The floor is yours.
Honorable ladies and gentlemen, Democratic Union of the Hellenic Minority Omonia represents the national Greek minority in Albania, which is officially recognized and it is the largest national minority of the country. Firstly, I would like to remind you that in October 2017, the Albanian Parliament adopted the law on protection of national minorities in the Republic of Albania. This law provided that within 6 months after its adoption, the Albanian government should have adopted the secondary legislation. However, the latter has yet to be published. The key issue that we face is the issue of our right to self-identification. From our point of view, as well as international law experts representing the OSCE and the Council of Europe, the new law continues the theory of minority zones, restrict the geographical scope of minorities protection. It does so by making depend the exercise of the right to self-identification on the civil status office, ethnicity data, and the census legislation. The census law currently in force was amended only 3 months before the holding of the 2011 census, introducing the high fine for the incorrect replies that did not correspond with data contained in the civil registry. Feeling that their rights were being denied, the minorities abstained from the process and denounced the census. Unfortunately, according to the draft law on 2020 census, nothing essential is going to be changed. For Omonia, this development constitutes again violation of the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. From our point of view, the right of self-identification shall be guaranteed throughout the territory of the Republic of Albania and not only within specific geographical areas, minority zones, taking into account objective criteria, in particular language and religion characteristics. The civil status of documentation shall not restrict in any way the right to self-identification of Albanian citizens. As far as the protection of property rights, or rather the lack of it, is concerned, we would like to bring to your attention that the Albanian government is trying to declare private land of extremely high value in regions inhabited by Greek as public. Through the implementation of this plan, many locals of Greek nationality will lose their valuable land and will be forced to leave their homes without even being compensated. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your remarks. The next speakers on my list are the Constantinopolitan Society, followed by the Ecumenical Federation of Constantinopolitans, followed by the United States of America. The Constantinopolitan Society, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the intervention of the Constantinopolitan Society, a non-governmental, non-profit organization established in 1928 in Greece, will focus briefly on serious issues related to human rights of the Greek minority in Turkey. Far away from European standards, seriously deteriorated after the 2016 failed coup attempt, the Turkish government continues to impose significant restrictions and serious limitations on human rights, thereby threatening the sustainable well-being, survival, and future of the remaining Greek minority in Turkey. The Greek minorities foundations have suffered from massive confiscations of their properties and remain unable to hold elections to renew the membership of their governing boards because the Turkish authorities, despite promises to do so, have still not promulgated new regulations. The property rights of the Greek minority foundations continue to be brutally violated. Greek minority schools face serious procedural difficulties and bureaucratic obstacles. Turkey continues refusing the succession rights of members of the minority with Greek nationality. Also, the Turkish authorities de facto deny to Greek citizens the right to inherit property in Turkey. Making a long story short, all members of the non-Muslim minorities in today's Turkey continue to be treated by the authorities as aliens. This unacceptable situation, which has been going on for decades, must finally be stopped. The full text of our statement is available on the Human Dimension Implementation Meeting official website. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, and also for respecting the time limits. Next on my list, I have the Ecumenical Federation of Constantinopolitans.
Distinguished delegates, the severe violations which took place against the Greek Orthodox community of Istanbul during the years 1923-2003 have been well documented and presented on several meetings of the UN Minority Forums, human rights meetings, and other international organizations. The most visible consequence of these anti-minority measures against the Greek Orthodox minority of Istanbul is the fact that 90–80% of the population of this community is presently living under expatriated conditions in various countries. The present government of Turkey, being in power from 2003, on several occasions recognized an unjust acts of the past against the community. In April 2018, the President Republic of Turkey, Mr. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in the nationwide TV interview mentioned this issue by saying that there are thousands, I say 100,000 Greek Orthodox Rum in our country. They were forced to emigrate because of mistakes, and this was a pity. Also, for the first time, the government of the Republic of Turkey provided a donation to social solidarity program of the Ecumenical Federation of Constantinopolitans supporting expatriated community. The very existence of the Greek Orthodox community in its homeland depends on the reversal of the population depletion of the community living inside Istanbul. This could only be achieved by repatriation of younger people from the community from abroad. In this process, the support of the welfare foundations in the community is crucial, taking into account that these are the only legal bodies which have any recognition status for the minority community. Despite this and the well-defined clause of the Lausanne Treaty stating that the minorities will administer their own welfare foundations effective 2013, the General Directorate of Welfare Foundation, by claiming the need of revision of election regulations, effectively prohibited the elections of the members of the administration boards in the Minority Welfare Foundation. This situation is causing severe problems in the administration of the foundations. Such measures prolong the serious drawbacks caused by the prohibition of elections to the Minority Welfare Foundations, and above all is in full contradiction with the laws of the Republic of Turkey as well as the Lausanne Treaty. Considering all these facts, Republic of Turkey is urgently called upon to take all necessary legal and administrative measures for elections carried out in the Minority Welfare Foundations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. The next speaker will be the delegation of the United States of America, followed by the Movement for the Renaissance of Northern Epirus, followed by Unidona Diversité Linguistique. the United States of America. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Let me begin by expressing the United States' appreciation for Ambassador Zenya's work as OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak at this important session. The independence and objectivity that Ambassador Zenya brings is important to us. Despite robust OSCE commitments, the principled engagement of the High Commissioner and the assistance of the field missions of OSCE, the human rights of persons belonging to national minorities are not fully respected throughout the region. After seizing Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula by force in 2014, the Russian Federation has sought to Russify the region by targeting Crimean Tatars and ethnic Ukrainians for repression. Russian bans the representative body of the Crimean Tatars as so-called extremist organization. We welcome the September the 7th prisoner exchange between Ukraine and Russia that resulted in the release of 35 Ukrainians, and we call on Russia to release all other Crimean Tatars and other Ukrainians it is unjustly imprisoned because of their opposition to Russia's illegal occupation. Under the occupation, there have been unsolved disappearances of over 12 Crimean Tatars, including activist Ervin Ibragimov, who has not been seen since 2016, when he was forced into a van after his car was stopped by men in traffic police uniforms. Where is he? In the Russian-occupied regions of Georgia, South Ossetia, and Abkhazia, ethnic Georgians face undue restrictions on their freedom of movement, property rights, and ability to participate in Georgian elections. We call for genuine investigations into the death of Kovatsky Kilia, who died in custody after allegedly crossing the administrative boundary line. We call for investigations for other additional deaths and those being held in custody in South Ossetia. Without these kinds of investigations, how can peace ever come back into the country of Georgia? Although OSCE and others in the international community have made significant efforts to promote democratic developments and ethnic reconciliation in the Western Balkans, ethnic intolerance and discrimination are still rampant. There's much still to be done in both Bosnia-Herzegovina, also in Serbia, and in Croatia. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for the chance to make a presentation and to submit our formal statement to the record.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate. And next on my list, I have the Movement for the Renaissance of Northern Epirus. The floor is yours.
The honorable delegates, the Greek national minority in Albania is fading away. The main reason is the velvet ethnic cleansing applied by the Albanian governments, from the authorities and organizations down to the ordinary Albanians. They have all received the propaganda messages against the Greek minority transmitted by the media. Unfortunately, an anti-Greek propaganda and xenophobia is being cultivated against the Greeks of Northern Epirus. Even this term is not accepted by the Albanian authorities, not even the names of the Greek villages themselves. Many members of the Greek national minority work in Greece and visit their families frequently. At the borders, the Albanian authorities are standing by to offer a special treatment. Some are being taken to police stations for questioning. Some remain in cold and wet detention centers for hours. Any documents or books, including their cell phones, are being confiscated without any explanation. Thorough checking is carried out on those of who take part in minority political activities, including university professors. All these actions are clearly aimed at forcing the Greek national minority to abandon its patrimonial lands, where the Greek language and place names still survive after 3,000 years of Greek presence. The pressure from the Albanian authorities is often unbearable. Not long ago, we watched in the media that the Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama and the former Prime Minister Sali Berisha are competing for who has done more to tarnish and eradicate the Greek national minority. In the village of Krania, in a minority area, twice last year in December 2018 and once in July 2019, Albanian nationalists destroyed the monument to a national hero of the minority. In the municipality of Himara, the Albanian government is trying to take possession of all coastal land from the Greek population of the area. For the tourist development, the Albanian government must clear first the area from the Greek element. Under the new Himara plan, as declared by the Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama in the Albanian Parliament, the region will be given to the tourist development at a price of €1 to large investors. The Greek national minority needs institutional protection to be able to survive in its land. The whole text in the documentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your remarks. On my list will be next Unis dans la diversité linguistique, followed by Institute of Legal Policy and Social Protection, named in the honor of Irina Berzer, followed by NGO INAM. Unis dans la diversité linguistique, the floor is yours.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Distinguished representatives, my name is Emmanuel Lemerlus. I represent an NGO, Unis dans la diversité linguistique. Our objective is to promote the Breton language spoken in Brittany in France. This is the last Celtic language spoken on the European continent. At the turn of the 20th century, over 1 million people spoke Breton. Today, most of them are in their 70s. France's attitude to the people of Brittany has remained the same. And if it continues in the same vein, the number of speakers will dwindle to the tens of thousands. UNESCO has deemed the Breton language as being in grave danger. The political measures taken by France, in fact the ones France is claiming to take, have done nothing to stem the decline. The language is losing several thousand speakers every year. And we have no law that we can harness to guarantee that we can keep the language alive, keep the culture alive, and promote it in the long term. High school students in the Divonne High School in Carré have been asking for the second year running if they could sit their high school leaving maths exam in the Breton language. The Ministry of Education has said no, it refuses to mark their papers. It said this on the 8th of October 2018. Meanwhile, high school students in the Basque Country have been allowed to sit this exam in the Basque language since 2012. The same minister questioned the use of immersive teaching in regional languages during a Senate debate on the 16th of May. Having said that, there is an association bringing together young Bretons defending the rollout of bilingual signs on major roads in Brittany. However, the rules are being flouted despite statements from the prefect and from the director of roads. Ms. Nathalie Loiseau, who topped the party list during the European elections at the presidential party's list, she spoke out against the ratification of the European Charter on Regional Languages. She did this on the France 3 TV channel. Lastly, France has not signed the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. I will be submitting the full version of my statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is the Institute of Legal Policy and Social Protection, named in the honor of Irina Berezna.
I am the director of the Ukrainian Institute for Social Protection and Legal Policy, and our institute is very grateful to Ambassador, the High Commissioner, for his visit to Ukraine and helping to resolve the problem of violation of the rights of national minorities. Let me move to the recommendations to insist that the Ukrainian government implement the recommendations of the Venice Commission in the field of education, to do away with all discriminatory standards when it comes to the use of the Ukrainian language as a state language, and on the law adopted in September of 2017 of the use of Ukrainian is a violation of the rights of national minorities. The government is duty-bound to make it possible for national minorities to learn in their languages. But now, in all the territory of Ukraine, Ukrainian is to be the only language, even in private schools. Now, the Venice Commission issued an expert opinion on the Ukrainian education law, and one of the conclusions is that this law is not in line with the basic principles set out in the Framework Convention on the Protection of National Minorities. The members of the Venice Commission also indicated that the law does not guarantee the use of languages by substantial groups, and they suggested that the corresponding measure in the law be changed. And yet, over the last 2 years, since that conclusion was published, no recommendations of the Venice Commission have been implemented. And the new law of April of this year is in fact in violation of the Constitution of Ukraine, the European Charter of Regional Languages and Minority Languages, and it is depriving the many millions of Russians living in Ukraine, but also Hungarians, Gagauzes, and others, the use of their own language. And this law, in fact, insists on Ukrainian to be the only language at all levels of government and in all schools. Now, 75% of the citizens of Ukraine know the Russian language, and they use the Russian language, and that should be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. We have next on the list NGO INAM, followed by NGO Anti-Fascist Human Rights League, followed by Baha'i International Community. NGO INAM, the floor is yours. Thank you.
2 days ago, we celebrated the 22nd anniversary of the existence of our NGO INAM. We are officially registered as an organization with the aim of improving the social protection of and civic rights of citizens, and we work in various ways. We have an advisory helpline with psychological and legal advice, and also a 24-hour hotline to combat trafficking in human beings. We train the population at large on various issues, and we have large-scale information campaigns covering the entire territory of the Turkmenistan. We have a website. All of our advice is anonymous and free of charge. Now, the actions of the club are based on the legislation of Turkmenistan, the statute of the club, and also officially registered grants that make it possible for us to resolve many contentious and humanitarian issues. Now, Turkmen is the official language, but Russian is a language of communication among ethnic groups, and so we provide our advice in both Turkmen and Russian. We offer various publications, flyers, calendars in Turkmen, Russian, but also in English. We have social advertising in the Turkmen and Russian languages in major newspapers. We have hired space on large screens in all airports, and this shows how people can get in touch with us. That is also in both Turkmen and Russian. Now, the main objectives of the helpline and hotline are to provide advice with no discrimination, with full tolerance, not taking into consideration the social class, the age, or the ethnic origins of the individuals. We assist individuals in submitting complaints or applications to the institutions of government. All of this is free of charge. Now, information service number 9, which works in Turkmen and Russian, also provides individuals with our telephone number when they need our assistance. Now, the work of the helpline and the hotline are real practical implementations of the principle of freedom of information at the national level for all citizens of Turkmenistan, independently of their ethnic origin and background. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next on my list, I have NGO Anti-Fascist Human Rights League. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I should like to draw everyone's attention to the fact that Ukraine, which is located in Europe, very close to the largest country in Europe, and because of the way historical events occurred, we have Hungarians, Romanians, Poles. We have many peoples living in Ukraine, especially in the east of Ukraine. We have a major Russian-speaking community. When Ukraine became independent in 1991, the future president, the authorities guaranteed that cultural and linguistic as well as religious diversity would be protected for all those residing in Ukraine. However, these promises today are dead letter. They are enshrined in the Constitution and international treaties we've signed, but they're not being put into practice. For instance, when the Dignity Revolution took place several years ago, promises were made that international norms would be transposed into Ukrainian law, European and international laws. However, there is now one church and one titular nation, which the state is being built around. The European Charter for National Languages and Minority Languages, in fact, despite this charter, a discriminatory law was adopted by the Rada on the use of the state language of Ukrainian in all spheres of public life. Pursuant to this law, media broadcasting in Ukraine must be 90% of the broadcasting must be in Ukrainian. When it comes to local media, at least 80% of prime time must be in Ukrainian. Furthermore, national minority languages cannot be used in schools, in higher education institutions. So in practice, the repercussions of the law are such that national minorities, ethnic groups in Ukraine can only use their languages at home and when performing religious rites. Basically, this law aims to impose blanket Ukrainization. The authorities have ignored Hungary's, Poland's, Romania's, and Slovakia's protests. Furthermore, I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that the right to vote was also flouted when the president and the Verkhovna Rada MPs were being elected. Those Ukrainians who had left the country to work abroad because the situation was so dire, the economy was in such dire straits, in Ukraine they were unable to take part in the electoral process. There were no polling booths in the Russian Federation, for instance. I am of the view that ODIHR should also pay attention to this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. The next speaker will be the Baha'i International Community, followed by Miko Imre Association for the Protection of Minority Rights, followed by Regional Public Organization. Baha'i International Community.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeff Simon from the Brussels office of the Baha'i International Community. The Baha'i International Community believes that beyond various approaches to fight prejudice and foster diversity, we need a new starting point for our conversations and endeavors, the recognition of the oneness of humanity. Humanity, including Europe, is undoubtedly gripped by a crisis of identity, as various peoples and groups struggle to define themselves, their place in the world, and how they should act. Without a vision of shared identity and common purpose, they fall into competing ideologies and power struggles. Seemingly countless variations of us and them define group identities ever more narrowly and in contrast to each other. Rather, conceptions about the primacy of a particular people are nurtured and refragment into ever smaller parts of opposing identities nourished by competing forces within our societies. Such a fragmented conception of human identity is radically different from the one that follows from a recognition of the oneness of humanity, and from the recognition of the truth that humanity is on a common journey in which all of us are protagonists. It will be very hard, if not impossible, to overcome prejudice in the long run by merely fighting hate. Denying what is destructive does not per se develop a constructive demeanor. The Baha'i international community encourages wholeheartedly the OSCE to explore what and how spaces can be created, whether at the local or the national level, informal or institutional, where people of all ages, and especially children and youth, can come to this understanding of a common identity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on the list is the Miko Imri Association for the Protection of Minority Rights. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as expressed in a 2018 declaration by the OSCE Ministerial Council, it is important to recognize the role that youth can play in contributing to a culture of peace, dialogue, justice, and peaceful coexistence, trust, and reconciliation. When it comes to minority youth, in order for them to be able to become agents of peace, it is essential to empower them, to give them the necessary tools to be able to forge their own future and the future of their communities. Empowering minority youth as agents of peace and security has to start with education, a minority education system based on equality and non-discrimination, equality in opportunities, equality in resources, in order to ensure an education system that does not discriminate when it comes to the quality of education. Regarding access to quality education in the mother tongue, an ongoing problem in Romania in the past few years has been the lack of textbooks available in minority languages in primary and secondary education. An entire generation, starting with the current 7th graders, are being taught based on a new national methodology. However, many of the textbooks printed according to this new methodology have in the past years arrived late, well after the start of the school year. It is worth noting that this is a problem which disproportionately affects children studying in a minority language, since after the lengthy process of approval, most of their books also have to be translated from Romanian to a minority language. It is an untenable situation that in the current school year, numerous textbooks for the Hungarian pupils, for example, are still waiting to be approved in the procurement process, while others are in the process of being translated. Therefore, it is important that when designing any educational reforms, particular attention is paid to the process of implementation, the resources needed, as well as anticipating possible shortcomings and solutions. In countries like Romania, where there is a minority language education system, relevant topics that should be monitored are manuals, the training of teachers, school equipments, as well as school performances of minority students. As repeatedly stressed by the panelists at the European Regional Forum on Minority Issues this year, applying a contextual approach when it comes to minority language education is crucial. Also, when devising and implementing new educational strategies, the relevant government agencies should not only consult but also closely work together with the minority communities and the experts in minority language education in order to ensure that the new measures adopted are not discriminatory towards minority students and that they are truly relevant and effective, answering actual problems and needs as formulated by the minority communities themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate the specific focus you gave in your comments on youth and education. Next on the list will be Regional Public Organization, followed by the Delegation of the Russian Federation, followed by the Mejelis of Crimean Tatar people. Regional Public Organization.
Я Анастасия Гричина, являюсь...
My name is Grichna, and I'm a representative of the Regional Public Organization in Ukraine. And now we have a website, and as an active participant in the life of Crimea, I can inform you that Ukrainians living in Crimea can enjoy a civil status on the same level as anyone in the Russian Federation. They are the second largest ethnic group in Crimea, and Ukrainian is one of the 3 official languages of the Republic. And this is something that should pertain in all other countries where there are large groups of minorities. The Ukrainian community of Crimea has this Ukrainian language internet site which is open to all Ukrainians around the world. And every information on the site is available in Ukrainian and in Russian. Ukrainians living in Crimea participate in the deployment of our project, this is unlike the prohibition against Russian language websites in Baltic states, for instance. This is a basic human right, and we protect it. We would invite positively thinking Ukrainian politicians to come to Crimea and to hear from the Crimeans about the events of 2014 and how they live on the peninsula since the change has occurred. Now, we would also like to invite the Commissioner for National Minorities of the OSCE to visit Crimea. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. Next on my list, I have the distinguished delegate of the Russian Federation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, we note the important role played by the High Commissioner for National Rights, for National Minorities in the OSCE area, especially against the backdrop of the need to prevent social conflicts arising because of ethnic factors. Unfortunately, the status of Russian national minorities in the Baltic states and the Russian language population in the Ukraine is going from bad to worse. As a result of the scandalous laws passed by the government which acceded to power by the Maidan, first and foremost the law on education and the law on the Ukrainian language as a state language, which entered into force on the 16th of July of this year, the Russian language, the language of the absolute majority of people living in Ukraine, is being subjected to double discrimination, whilst European languages get preferential treatment. Another pressing issue is national minorities in the Baltic states. The authorities are doing their utmost to clamp down and squeeze out the Russian language out of the public sphere and political life, marginalizing the Russian speakers. The most flagrant example is Latvia. All schools will be teaching only in Latvian starting in 2021. Furthermore, there are new guiding principles for state preschool education and preschool model curricula. Now, this means that Russian language children will be forced to use the Latvian language in a number of spheres. This runs afoul of Latvia's international obligations, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child. In Estonia, they're continuing to advance on the Russian language. The concluding remarks of the ECOSOC report covering Estonia, which came out on the 27th of March 2019, notes this. It outlines the fact that Tallinn has taken a punitive approach to applying the language laws and has systematically discriminated against part of the population, especially non-citizens, that is, stateless persons, because their mastery of the Estonian language is subpar. Furthermore, we're concerned about the First Nation people in Canada, especially Native Americans and Arctic Inuit tribes. These tribes are systematically persecuted, discriminated against more so than any other group. We've also seen an increase in crimes against women and girls, especially when the forced sterilizations which are taking place. Furthermore, there are still reservations in Canada where Indigenous peoples are living in unsanitary conditions on the poverty line. We call on the HCNM to pay attention to this issue, to ensure a principled assessment of the aforementioned practices, and to take steps to remedy the situation. We will submit our text to the Secretariat.
Thank you very much for your remarks. Next on the list will be the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people, followed by the delegate from Ukraine, followed by the Fund for Legal Support and Protection of Compatriots' Rights Abroad. The Majlis of Crimean Tatar people. The floor is yours.
Спасибо. Thank you, moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, I am the president of the Majlis, which is the representative body of the Crimean Tatar people, elected by an assembly of the Tatar people. In 2017, the Ukrainian occupying courts in Crimea called the Majlis, labeled the Majlis a terrorist organization and prohibited its activities. In March of 2014, 5.5 years ago, Crimea fell under the full control of the Russian military and secret service. There was subsequently a so-called referendum, after which Russia attempted to annex Crimea, declaring that it is part of its territory. This aggression by Russia is a flagrant violation of the rights of the Crimean Tatar. Just one point from the Bakinski Declaration that was adopted in June of 2014 by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and I quote, starting in February of 2014, the Russian Federation in its relations with Ukraine has violated all of the Helsinki principles, in many cases in a flagrant and completely unjustified manner. The critical situation of fundamental freedoms and human rights of Crimean Tatars is something that is studied at sessions of the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE and other international organizations, including the General Assembly of the United Nations. But let us note, not a single resolution of the European Parliament, of the Council of Europe, of the United Nations concerning the rights of the Crimean Tatars, the indigenous people of Crimea, have been fulfilled by the Russian Federation. In fact, they are being cynically ignored. Russia has also ignored the decisions of the various international courts to cease to occupy Crimean Tatars and to cease labeling the Mejlis a terrorist organization and preventing it from being active. The main source of the violation of the collective rights of the indigenous peoples of Crimea and the violation of the peoples on the peninsula is the Russian occupation. It is the occupation of Crimea that must be brought to an end. That must be one of the main tasks of the OSCE and of other international organizations in order that Crimean Tatars' human rights finally be respected.
Thank you very much for your remarks. Next on my list, I have the distinguished delegate from Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Distinguished participants, Yuri Kononenko. I'm head of department in the Ministry of Education in Ukraine. Ukraine guarantees the right to get an education in their native language and to learn their native language as per the Constitution, the European Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, the European Charter for Regional Languages, and we also guarantee the right to acquire the state language. There are, in fact, 8 national minority languages: Hungarian, Crimean Tatar, Polish, Russian, Slovakian, to name but 5 of them. As for secondary education, yes, there are 8 languages available: Bulgarian, Moldovan, Russian, Slovakian, and 4 others. There are 194 schools run in Russian, and there are thousands and thousands of students getting an education in Russian. There are also many other languages, such as Turkish and Czech, which can be taken as an elective in schools. We have curricula which have been established. This is funded out of our budget, and also textbooks are being printed. As for universities, we train lecturers so they can teach in Polish and Romanian and Russian and Slovakian and Crimean Tatar and other languages. The Ministry of Education, within it, has a special council on national minorities, and we constantly consult these national minorities on pressing matters. Furthermore, we have education projects run with the involvement of the HCNM. I wanted to underscore that the Ministry of Education and Science, as well as other authorities, have not received complaints about citizens' inability to get an education in the national language. We want to flag up our concerns regarding the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, which is illegally occupied by the Russian Federation. The number of students has fallen by a factor of 150. That is, people getting an education in the Ukrainian language. There's only one such school left. Also, the number of educational institutions where you can learn the Crimean Tatar language, the Ukrainian language, has fallen, as has the number of students. This is a flagrant violation of the rights of Ukrainians and the Crimean Tatar people by the occupying power. In the occupied Donbass, the Russian curriculum has been introduced, which is illegal. According to official statistics, there are 2 million Ukrainians living there. However, there is not a single school running classes in Ukrainian that's up and running. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the distinguished delegate. Next on my list, I have the Fund for Legal Support and Protection of Compatriots' Rights Abroad, followed by the Latvian Human Rights Committee, followed by Legal Information Center for Human Rights. I give the floor to the Fund for Legal Support and Protection of Compatriots' Rights Abroad.
Moderator, thank you, dear colleagues. Regularly, for decades now, at OSCE meetings, representatives of NGOs have drawn attention to the unacceptability, from the point of view of international law, of the problem of non-citizens in Latvia and Estonia. This is a shame in contemporary Europe. At the present time, there are 220,000 non-citizens in Latvia, 10.6% of the population. And in fact, that represents 70% of all non-citizens living on the territory of the European Union. As of 1 January of this year, with a total population of 1.3 million in Estonia, there are 76,000 non-citizens, about 6% of the population of the country. These are people who don't have the right to vote in parliamentary elections, and they're deprived of other rights. Estonia is in fact 10th in the world when it comes to the number of people with undetermined citizens. Now the ECRI, the European Commission for Combating Racism and Intolerance, in the Council of Europe, in its general political recommendation, has defined the concept of segregation. If there is a coercive nature of a division, of separation, then it is segregation. And this is something that occurs in these two countries. It's a new type of apartheid. Now, despite the fact that there have been many recommendations by specialized international organizations, in particular the Council of Europe in the form of the European Commission on Combating Racism and Intolerance, and also the Consultative Committee of the Framework Convention to protect national minorities, officials in Riga and Tallinn continue to ignore these recommendations. So all we can do is observe that this institution of large-scale non-citizenship is going to be preserved in the European Union, and there will be no prospects for doing away with this in the near future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your remarks. I give the floor now to the Latvian Human Rights Committee.
Thank you. Over the last year, which has passed since the previous Human Dimension implementation meeting, the authorities of Latvia have started to implement the amendments to education laws adopted last year on elimination of education in minority languages in high schools and further restriction of the use of these minority languages, especially those which don't have an official status in the European Union, concerning the basic and primary schools. Moreover, an cabinet regulation was adopted last November to introduce education mostly in Latvian, also in minority kindergartens, starting from age 5, starting from 2019. This policy has been widely criticized internationally. It has attracted concerns both from the European Parliament Committee on Culture and Education, from the High Commissioner on National Minorities, from the Framework Convention on National Minorities Advisory Committee, from several United Nations Special Rapporteurs, and from the UN Committee on Elimination of Racial Discrimination. However, this April, the Constitutional Court of Latvia has upheld the restrictions concerning public schools. The case on the same restrictions concerning private schools is still ongoing, and the court has just ignored the opinions of the Committee on Elimination of Racial Discrimination, of the Advisory Committee of the Framework Convention, saying that the committees did not have full information. This is lack of respect not only to the Hague recommendations of the OSCE, but also to the lack of respect to international treaties. And our recommendations for Latvia are, first of all, to make these obligations and Hague recommendations the corner of its education policy, and to switch from capping the use of minority languages in education to establishing minimums of its use and protection. The full text will be available online, and the participants can also see information material provided on the desks around here. Thank you.
Thank you for your timely submission and also for the focus which you have made on youth. On the list will be Legal Information Center for Human Rights, followed by European Center for Democracy Development, followed by Interregional Social Movement for Democracy and Human Rights. Legal Information Center for Human Rights.
Благодарю. Thank you very much. Mr. Moderator, Mr. High Commissioner, distinguished participants, as has been said, in Estonia, we still have the pressing issue of statelessness. In 2019, 5.5% of our population were either non-citizens or stateless persons. This has been the case for 27 years now, ever since we regained independence. I'll now turn to our recommendations. In order to resolve the issue of statelessness, we need to amend the law on foreigners and strike down the requirements to pass a language exam for those who are applying for the status of a long-term EU resident in Estonia. This must be done first and foremost, or at the very least, for pensioners and persons with disabilities. These people, the elderly and persons with disabilities, have been living in Estonia for a long time. They shouldn't have to pass a language exam. All those legally residing in Estonia for over 10 years should get Estonian nationality if they have no other nationality, that is, if they're stateless persons. So-called non-citizens in Estonia have seen their rights trampled, including their socioeconomic rights. Over the last few years, we've had many complaints lodged with my organization from permanent residents in Estonia. These are overwhelmingly elderly persons and persons with disabilities, citizens of third parties, or stateless persons. In 2006, 2007, for one reason or another, did not apply for a long-term residence permit, and therefore they are so-called temporary residents. As per the EU directive on the rights of nationals of third countries legally residing in the EU, in 2003, Estonia amended the legislation and introduced a language exam for those seeking Estonian citizenship. However, some permanent residents also had to pass this exam. These so-called new foreigners, incoming foreigners, were able to apply for citizenship, and they could do so without passing a language exam before 2007, the end of 2007. Since then, everyone has had to pass an Estonian language exam except the legally incapacitated and those who have gotten an exemption from a special committee. Thus, those seeking to achieve long-term resident status have not been able to secure their social and economic rights, especially their civic rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next to present will be the European Center for Democracy Development. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I must say that I was quite surprised to hear what the Deputy Minister of Ukraine said. He apparently doesn't know that since September of 2016 there is a new education law in Ukraine according to which children of national minorities from the fifth year of school are to study only in Ukrainian. So, I mean, it's as the father of a daughter in the fifth year of school, I can tell you that this is terrible. It really is terrible. Russian is learned only as a foreign language. I mean, you worry about Crimean Tatars, but how many Crimean Tatar schools have you opened on the territory of Ukraine? A lot of them have moved to Ukraine. Have you opened a single one? No, not a single one. Russian schools in Ukraine have been decimated. There's 1/5 of what there used to be. So the Russian national minority has become a hostage to your relations with Russia. I mean, it's normal that Hungary is blocking your participation in all meetings of NATO, the European Union, and so on, because you have no Hungarian language schools. I mean, if I were in this situation, if I took such decisions, I would be ashamed. I mean, to undermine the rights of such a large minority results in the less success by these individuals in post-secondary education, so they can't contribute as much. This reduces the probability of Donbass and to be reunited with Ukraine, and this is a violation of the International Convention on Genocide. And resolving this problem can be done in only one way, namely that there be the possibility for remote education in Russian and other minority languages. That is already being organized by Russia, Hungary, and others. The teaching Hungarian within the family and by remote education is something that is being done. So I would urge the OSCE and others to support such initiatives by providing grants for such remote teaching of those languages. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. So next on the list will be Interregional Social Movement for Democracy and Human Rights, followed by Russian School of Estonia, followed by Information Group on Crimes Against the Person. So I give the floor now to Interregional Social Movement for Democracy and Human Rights.
Good morning. Time is limited, so I'll go straight to the recommendations. Recommendation number 1. The Baltic states should stop discriminating against the Russian-speaking population. Second, the OSCE, ODIHR, and other international organizations should look into the violation of the rights of Russian speakers in the Baltic states. Third, European countries which haven't yet supported the UN resolution, which I'll be talking about in a moment, well, you should adopt it. I'm referring to the UN resolution on combating the glorification of Nazism and other practices which prompt a rise in xenophobia, racial discrimination, and intolerance. Let me give you an example of discriminatory practice. Statelessness. Monuments to the Nazis. Also, bans on teaching in the Russian language, arrests of activists on trumped-up charges, criminal charges being brought against them. I'm referring to activists defending the rights of Russian-speaking minorities and other discriminatory practices which seek to violate the rights of national minorities. I'll be submitting the full version of my statement to the Secretariat.
Thank you very much for your remarks, and we always appreciate when speakers start with their recommendations. It makes it very much easier to take the notes. Okay, next on the list is the Russian School of Estonia. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like, in fact, to draw your attention to the critical situation that has developed in Estonia when it comes to Russian schools and preschools or kindergartens. Last year at this same meeting, the representative of Estonia referred to the presence of Russian schools in Estonia as an achievement and that this was a model of respect for the rights of the Russian national minority. But unfortunately, this is not an achievement because the system that remains is just a rump of what has been destroyed by the Estonian authorities over 30 years. In particular, since Estonia regained independence in 1991, higher education in the Russian language has been done away with completely. Middle schools have been Estonized, and teachers for Russian schools have not been trained. Russian schools and kindergartens are under constant threat of Estonization, and Russian children are at risk of assimilation. Now, what can happen in this respect through legislative extremism can be seen on the example of neighboring Latvia, where the country has decided in favor of forcible assimilation of Russian children by completely moving the Latvian language into all Russian schools. And the same initiatives and threats are to be found in Estonia. All parliamentary parties in Estonia support the abolition of education in Russian and the transfer of all Russian schools into the Estonian language education system. There is no consideration for the interests and rights of the Russian national minority, the ethnic and cultural basis of which must be Russian schools and kindergartens. This leads to the assimilation of Russian children, which is a flagrant violation of the Framework Convention for the Protection of the Rights of National Minorities, a convention that has been ratified by both Estonia and Latvia. Thank you. I will give the text to the Secretariat.
Thank you very much for your remarks. Next on my list will be the Information Group on Crimes Against the Person, followed by United Left Party of Estonia, followed by the delegation of Switzerland. Information Group on Crimes Against the Person, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Добрый день.
Good morning, Mr. Moderator, colleagues. The topic is the protection of national minorities' rights in OSCE participating states. I want to note the rise of political movements and parties who ascribe to a xenophobic and neo-Nazi ideology. They call for national rights to have their rights trampled, if not annihilated. Turning to the recommendations. In the Baltic states and Ukraine, what needs to be done is to ensure that all links with neo-Nazi parties and movements cease, because this means that the overtone window is moving and now includes Nazi organizations, international organizations. The OSCE, ODIHR, and various Council of Europe bodies. We recommend that you pay particular attention to the growing prominence of neo-Nazi movements, parties, and the international ties which they've established. We call on you to put an end to practices which violate national minorities' rights across Europe. Last but not least, we call on all EU countries to adopt the UN resolution on combating the glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism, and other practices which might result in the escalation of modern forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. In brief, the rationale for what I'm saying. Well, you see, in Ukraine, starting in 2014, there's been a neo-Nazi organization. It used to be a battalion. Now it's called the Azov Battalion. This is part of the National Guard of Ukraine. What this battalion does is basically it engages in ethnic cleansing in the east of Ukraine, in the Donbass. The fact that this organization is a neo-Nazi organization has been evidenced by numerous studies, including a study conducted by the FBI in the United States. Nonetheless, despite all of this, this organization is actively cooperating with politicians in Latvia, Poland, and Denmark, and, unless I'm mistaken, Croatia as well. Thank you very much. I will be submitting the full text of my statement to the Secretariat.
Thank you very much. Next is the United Left Party of Estonia.
Moderator, ladies and gentlemen. Characterizing the situation of national minorities in Estonia in just one word, I mean, the word would be Russophobia. Now, how did we reach this point? Well, it was the stealing of Russian citizenship, of Soviet citizenship, from 500,000 Russians back in 1989. And this is a crime against humanity. I mean, it's a massive violation of human rights. The right to citizenship is set out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Framework Convention on the Protection of National Minorities is something that has been ratified, but Estonia stated that national minorities will be protected only if they are citizens. But that is contrary to the very spirit of the convention, because there it stated that protecting national minorities is an inalienable part of protecting human rights. You can only protect people and not just citizens. Estonia is very proud of its law on cultural autonomy, and it often refers to that. But more than 10 years ago, at the level of the government, it was recognized either by the government that there is no need to modernize that law. An initiative to set up a Russian cultural autonomy was blocked by the Ministry of Culture. So there is a forcible Estonization of Russian schools. And let's look at this from the legal point of view. I mean, the objective is in violation of the Estonian constitution itself, according to which everyone has the right to learn in the Estonian language. But that right has been turned into an obligation. And as a last point, I would mention that the authorities of all three Baltic states really make it very difficult for the Russian communities of their countries to remain in touch. There are blacklists of people who are prohibited from entering the country. There have been attempts to get an explanation for this, but this resulted in nothing. There is the Lisbon Agreement that all three Baltic states signed, and according to that, a prohibition of entry onto a territory can be based on only one thing, and that is an intention to commit a crime. So I would like the OSCE to take that into consideration.
Thank you for your remarks. Next on my list will be the delegation of Switzerland, followed by Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association, followed by International Council of Russian Compatriots. The delegation of Switzerland, the floor is yours.
Monsieur le modérateur. Thank you, moderator. Switzerland deems the issue of national minorities as being an important topic for the OSCE. We've always appreciated the work of the High Commissioner for National Minorities and assure him of our continuing support. We'd like to use this opportunity to welcome the kickstarting of the Tallinn guidelines by the High Commissioner. In societies where minorities live side by side with majorities, the role of the media and information technologies in conflict prevention cannot be denied. Thus, the 37 thematic recommendations contained in the guidelines are especially useful for states. Switzerland brings together diverse linguistic, cultural, and religious communities. Therefore, we believe that protecting the rights of minorities, national minorities, is of vital importance. In 1998, we ratified the Council of Europe Framework Convention on the Protection of National Minorities, thereby recognizing as national minorities living in Switzerland national linguistic minorities, members of the Jewish community, as well as the Niche, the Sinti, and the Roma, whether nomadic or not. Our recommendations are as follows. First and foremost, Switzerland recommends that participating states should draw inspiration from the Tallinn guidelines, adapting them to the national context and putting them into practice. Second, we invite the OSCE to continue and to beef up its cooperation with the Council of Europe and the United Nations. We commend the fact that an event will be held in New York covering the issue of national minorities. This will be on the sidelines of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Also to thank all participants, because today I noticed that everyone is very timely and concise in their remarks, and we're making good time. We're about halfway through our regular list. Next, we have Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. My name is Pervin Hayrullah. I am representing the Turkish minority in Greece. The Turkish minority in Western Thrace, Greece, has been officially recognized by Greece in 1923 with the Lausanne Peace Treaty. In this regard, it is fair to say that the Lausanne Peace Treaty is the backbone of the status of the Turkish minority in Western Thrace. Yet it goes without saying that the contemporary minority rights go well beyond what the said treaty had anticipated. In other words, the international documents such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the European Convention on Human Rights are basic supplementary frameworks that determine the rights of minorities all around the world. We would like to reiterate that members of the Turkish minority are facing serious problems in terms of using their rights emanating from and guaranteed by the said conventions agreements to which Greece is also a party. The Greek authorities deny the ethnic Turkish identity of the minority on the grounds that the Lausanne Peace Treaty refers to Muslim minority. However, établi documents which were issued to the people of Greek and Turkish origin who were left out of the exchange procedure in 1923 refer to the ethnic origin of the Muslim minority in Greece as Turkish. In practice, all Greek citizens, including the members of the minority, have the right to self-identification. However, the Turkish minority is prohibited from establishing associations with the word Turkish in their names. On the other side, the Pomak or Roma ethnic groups are recognized and even welcomed and supported by the authorities, as they are free to establish and operate their NGOs by using the words Pomak and Roma in the names of the institutions. The educational autonomy has been undermined and diminished by governmental practices over the years. There are no minority private kindergartens for the minority children to learn their mother tongue in their early childhood. The Greek authorities refrain from replying to the applications of minority to open Turkish-Greek bilingual kindergartens in the existing bilingual minority primary schools. The Turkish minority of Western Thrace calls upon the OSCE participating states to monitor Greece in terms of minority policies and encourage the Greek authorities to implement the provisions of minority rights protection mechanisms. We call upon the Greek state to respect the minority's right to self-identification and to promote its collective usage, to have a sincere dialogue and cooperation with the minority representatives in order to build mutual trust. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. The next order of speakers will be International Council of Russian Compatriots, followed by International Public Organization Mekhetynski Turks Vatan Yolanda, followed by Association of Russian Lawyers of Russia. International Council of Russian Compatriots. The floor is yours.
Добрый день.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Moderator, thank you for giving me the floor. I represent the International Council of Russian Compatriots. We, in fact, are a federation of some 50 groups of Russian compatriots living around the world. We believe that these individuals should be provided with linguistic, political, civic, and social rights. But when it comes to the rights of our compatriots on the territory of Ukraine, and this is true also of Crimean Tatars, Greeks, Hungarians, and others, and other people have said this already, this is one of the most serious problems in this young state. Just a few comments about the Crimean Tatars. Let me quote something that was said by Mustafish Medjilyova, a former leader of the Crimean Tatar, at the third session of the Kultai, the General Assembly of Tatars. He accused the Ukrainian authorities of discrimination against the Crimean Tatars. And then on Radio Freedom, Radio Svoboda, he characterized Ukraine as a racist organization that ignores the rights, tramples on the rights of a whole people. This can be found on the internet. So Ukraine and Ukrainian politicians have used Crimean Tatars as instruments to achieve their own political ends. If you look at the Ukrainian law on the rehabilitation of the victims of political repression, not a single Crimean Tatar received property that had been stripped from him. And this policy indicates that there is an attempt really to liquidate these debts completely. After the unification of Crimea with Russia, Ukraine really could somehow react to the suffering of these peoples, but that has been not been the case. In 2014, a law was enacted that guaranteed the right to self-determination and education of Crimean Tatars within the territory of Ukraine, and the recognition of Mejlis. And the Declaration of the United Nations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was something that was not supported by Ukraine. I'd like to invite you to a side event at 1815 on that very subject of Crimean Tatars. Thank you.
Thank you. International Public Organization Mechetinsky Turks, Vatan Yolanda.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm the head of the International Public Organization Mechetinsky Turks. My people have been deported on 3 occasions. For 75 years, we haven't had a motherland, and we've been moving around all over the world. As you know, many tragedies have befallen my people. First of all, deportation. In 1944 from Georgia, tens of thousands of people lost their lives on that occasion. Women, the elderly, children. Then in Uzbekistan, in Fergana Valley, in 1989, thousands of people were forced to abandon their property on that occasion. Then, in the Krasnodar region in Russia, we were also persecuted. As a result, 17,000 people were forced to flee to the United States, leaving their property and their belongings behind. The OSCE and the Council of Europe prompted the Georgian government to adopt a law in 2007 repatriating my people to our homeland. Thus, we were given the right to return. However, the law is in fact not being implemented, or being implemented only partially. Therefore, my fellow countrymen have been unable to return to our homeland. OSCE participating states, I believe that you are endowed with the greatest powers in Europe when it comes to national minorities. If you prompt the Georgian authorities to do something, we might be able to enact change. I call on you to talk to the Georgian president, to the parliament, to the Georgian government, so that the legislation in place can be implemented in full. Resolving this issue will help us to once again help thousands of people to once again believe that there is such a thing as justice. We're counting on your goodwill and your decisive action. Thank you.
Thank you for your intervention. The next list will be Association of Russian Lawyers of Russia, followed by Religious Administration of Muslims in Crimea, followed by Federation of Cultural Organizations of Tatars in Turkey. The Association of Russian Lawyers of Russia.
Thank you very much. Dear participants, we really draw attention to this massive phenomenon of non-citizenship in Europe, especially in Latvia and Estonia. More than half of the non-citizens are ethnic Russians, and this really is a discriminatory policy, since in these countries these non-citizens have many of their rights restricted. At the present time, both the Estonian and Latvian governments are taking measures to simplify the procedure for obtaining citizenship by children. And yet in Latvia, all children born before 1 June 2018, if their parents are non-citizens, they are automatically non-citizens at the time of their birth. And for such a child to receive Latvian citizenship, an additional procedure is required. Now, it should be noted that children belonging to minorities and less than 15 years old are the most vulnerable in social and psychological terms because they can be objects of intolerance on ethnic, racial, linguistic, or other grounds. In 2019, a number of lessons of psychology were introduced in schools, and children are talking about being bullied and harassed. There is also a lot of severity and intolerance in secondary schools based on language or other forms of intolerance. This can result in these children becoming real victims, and we believe the following principles should be applied. To combat discrimination against minorities in the field of education by introducing programs that combat bullying and discrimination against children belonging to minorities, contributing to the integration of children in the social life of the country, guaranteeing social, economic, political, and other rights to representatives of national minorities on the same level as for citizens of the state. Next, to do away with discriminatory policies, especially in the case of the Russian language minority in certain countries of Europe. Special protection and guarantees of rights for children whose parents belong to national minorities. The full text of our statement will be distributed through the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I give the floor to Religious Administration of Muslims of Crimea. The floor is yours.
By your office of elected, I'm a deputy of a mufti and I'm an imam from the Crimea. Ladies and gentlemen, the Crimean Renaissance has begun after we languished for years. Religious spiritual institutions are going from strength to strength. We are ensuring that there's freedom of religion and protecting Muslims' rights. Over 40 mosques have been built over the last few years, including a long-awaited mosque which will fit 4,000 people. On the whole, we have over 300 mosques and prayer institutions, and they're very well attended. 250 imams, who are men, and over 150 women teachers spread the word about traditional Muslim values. Over 5,000 people undergo Muslim training every year. Young Muslims are involved in these efforts, performing religious rituals and undergoing training. And you can hear the muezzin issuing the call to prayer 5 times a day. There are various seminaries that are operating for men and women. There are no restrictions on the freedom of religion. Sacral sites are being returned to the Crimean Tatars, for instance, the complex in Bakhchisarai. Every year, more and more people go on pilgrimages. We can celebrate Muslim holidays, and in fact, many of them are official. Mass celebrations are held in towns and villages on these joyous occasions. A few words about the positive developments in secular education. There's a Crimean Pedagogical Institute, which is in fact a symbol of unity in the Crimea. 60% of those attending the university are Crimean Tatars. Modernization is underway at the university. There's also a polytechnic wing that's been built, a dorm, a library, and sports halls. Graduates from the university are in high demand on the labor market, including in the state sector. There are also national schools where you can undergo instruction in the Crimean Tatar language, and my children, in fact, attend one such school. What is still a pressing issue is the fight against various radical religious teachings. These have been spreading in the Crimea since the 1990s. In fact, the issue is that these ideas go against traditional Islam, sowing discord amongst Crimean Tatars in the Ukraine, laying the groundwork for interreligious and interethnic conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next list of speakers will be Federation of Cultural Organizations of Tatars in Turkey, followed by Hellenic Union of Progressive Lawyers, followed by the delegation of Serbia. The Federation of Cultural Organizations of Tatars in Turkey, the floor is yours. Do we have a representative of the Federation of Cultural Organizations of Tatars in Turkey?
Sayın Başkan, saygıdeğer diplomatlar, Kırım ve diasporada yaşayan bütün Kırım Tatar toplumu adına hepinizi saygıyla selamlıyorum. Milletlerimizin ortak tarihi, bugünkü Avrupa'yı şekillendiren kavimler
Unfortunately, the speaker is speaking a language that is not one of the official languages of the conference, and therefore the interpreters cannot interpret.
Ailesinin ayrılmaz bir parçasıdır. Kırım olmadan Avrupa'nın güvenliği ve istikrarı
Excuse me, sir,
düşünülemez.
I'm hesitant to interrupt you, but I must inform you that most of the participants are unable to understand you because you're not speaking in one of the languages of the conference.
Tercüme verdi İngilizce.
Are you able to continue your intervention in one of the official languages of the conference?
He said that he has submitted a transcript of what he's saying in another language, so we will be hearing that soon.
I'd like to thank the gentleman and encourage participants to review the document that has been submitted. We will now move on to the Hellenic Union of Progressive Lawyers.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Hellenic Union of Progressive Lawyers recently received claims about a visa ban against members of the Greek minority in Crimea, who counts about 6,000 or 7,000 people. Their problem is that the Greek consulates in Russia deny to issue visas for them, even for tourism, even to travel to their country of origin, Greece. Some examples. Students of Greek origin studying Greek language in Thessaloniki University were recently denied the visa to continue their studies. University professors of Greek origin were denied the visa to attend a seminar in Crete, and so on. This happens because EU does not recognize the outcome of the referendum in 2014 for integration of Crimea in Russia and compel member states to do the same. On this basis, EU issued the guidelines in 2016 asking its members to don't recognize passports issued for Crimean citizens. Some members obeyed, the most weak, the strongest did not. As a result, the Greek consulates in Russia asked their compatriots to apply for visa to the Greek consulates in Ukraine. Practically, they ask for the impossible. This is a breach of human rights, of freedom of movement and education, and it is illegal, first of all, because the goal of these practices is to punish the ordinary people who voted in a way we don't like. Of course, failure to respect the results of a referendum is nothing unusual. Also, double standards policies are not something uncommon. But in the case I am referring to, there is a serious impact in the human rights of innocent people who suffer the loss of their freedom of movement or the right to academic studies in Greece. Concluding, my proposal for OSCE is to ask the Commission of EU to avoid or to revoke practices who consider human rights as a collateral damage in the geopolitical struggle. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. The following speakers, this will be the list. the delegation of Serbia, followed by Regional National Cultural Autonomy Belarusians of Crimea, followed by Gasprinsky Institute for Geostrategy. The delegation of Serbia, the floor is yours. We're going to move directly on to the Regional National Cultural Autonomy Belarusians of Crimea. The floor is yours.
Good day, colleagues and friends. In the Republic of Crimea, we have 170 different ethnic groups. That also includes Belarusians who came to Crimea at the end of the 17th century. They're the fourth largest ethnic group in Crimea after the Tatars, the Russians, and the Ukrainians. We are involved in the social life in a non-conflictual way. Belarus and Crimea have an exchange organization, and our objective is to develop Belarusian culture and to ensure close links between the Belarusians in Belarus and in Crimea. And now the Ukrainian authorities are trying to foment hatred and inter-ethnic conflict on the peninsula of Crimea. But the mentality of the Belarus people is very peace-loving. We have never started any war whatsoever, and that is why the Belarus of Crimea in 2017 called for the setting up of a single association of Belarusians in Crimea, which was not possible over the 20-odd years of occupation of Crimea by Ukraine. We find it possible to interact very closely with ethnic groups. Now, it is absolutely essential that there be closer links with Ukrainians, and so we propose that the information and economic war waged by Ukraine against the people of Crimea be brought to an end, and we would invite the High Commissioner personally to visit the peninsula in order to see. There's really only one recommendation. Please come and visit us. Don't listen to the fake news that you hear from individuals who are using Crimea for their own political ends. Crimea made the right choice in 2014. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is the Gasprinsky Institute for Geostrategy. The floor is yours.
Mr. Moderator, participants of this meeting, my name is Nariman Ustaev and I am a director of Gasprinsky Institute for Geostrategy. The newest history has brought Crimean Tatars new challenges, the main one of which is the legal annexation of Crimea by Russia Federation. The Crimean Tatar people are under constant pressure of Russian authorities, the threat of persecution, loss of freedom for 5 years now. In this context, it is vital to acknowledge the importance of protection of Crimean Tatars' rights and interests, and that their rights and freedoms require protection on the level of the Constitution of Ukraine and its laws. However, some draft laws which are regulating the status of the Crimean Tatar people are already in the process of elaboration. The Member of Parliaments, together with the Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people, experts and the civil society are working on draft law on the status of the Crimean Tatar people as indigenous people of Ukraine, amendments to the Constitution of Ukraine regarding Crimea and Crimean Tatars. In this context, it is important to study the good practices of other states whose legislation guarantees such a right to indigenous people and to develop a similar political formula for Ukraine. They are also working on legal conditions to improve the lives of citizens who are connected to the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine and repealing the law of Ukraine on the free economic zone, Crimea. We suggest to create an international interparliamentary platform that will unite the Member of Parliament of Ukraine and the members of parliaments of our democratic states in order to coordinate international pressure on Russia in the context of human rights protection in Crimea and to strengthen sanction policy against Russia in order to liberate Crimea and to restore sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Also, in order to resolve the situation in occupied Crimea, we kindly request the OSCE to send a special human rights mission to Crimea to understand the process that are taking place with the citizens of Ukraine living there, including the Crimean Tatar people. It's clear that the work of such a mission must be agreed by Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next on my list, I will have Sandidzan, followed by National Forum Ossetia Accuses, followed by the delegation of Serbia. Thank you. Sandidzan.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to share with you some facts about the violation of the rights of ethnic Ossetians in Georgia. Georgia has systematically proclaimed that it is implementing a plan for the peaceful settlement of the Georgia-Ossetia conflict devised by Western political advisors. However, the plan's name has changed, but the situation remains the same. And in fact, the current peace plan, A Step to a Brighter Future, which was drafted this year, has supposedly met its objective. But it is in fact a politicized plan aimed at ensuring that humanitarian issues in Georgia are not resolved. It is intended to achieve political objectives. Human rights organizations in Ossetia have on a number of occasions put forward proposals for the Georgian authorities and international organizations accredited in Georgia, which can help us to resolve the issues surrounding national minorities in Georgia, specifically ethnic Ossetians' problems. We also called for an end to the policy of squeezing out ethnic Ossetians in Georgia. A clear example of this is the fact that according to the latest census, there is only 14,000 Ossetians left in Georgia. According to the 1989 census, there were 126,000 Ossetians in Georgia, and that's outside the South Ossetian Autonomous Region. According to the 2002 census, there were 38,000 Ossetians. This attests to the fact that there's a discriminatory policy being implemented by Georgia vis-a-vis ethnic Ossetians. As for the Kazbek region in Georgia, in 2002, there were 2,867 ethnic Ossetians living there. However, in 2014, that figure had fallen to 1,327. Unfortunately, after Georgia attacked South Ossetia in 2008, Tbilisi has used a familiar toolkit of discriminatory measures against Ossetians, forcing them to leave their homeland. Georgia has achieved its objectives. Today, the Georgian authorities have declared that Russians can visit Georgia visa-free. However, those born in and coming from the Kazbek region, who are also Russian citizens, are being discriminated against as they cannot visit their homeland. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, we have National Forum Ossetia Accuses.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, moderator. We have often drawn the attention of the Georgian authorities and representatives of OSCE states to problems confronting national minorities in Georgia and especially Ossetians. Today in Georgia, there are about 14,000 ethnic Ossetians. By comparison, in 1989, according to the population census, there were 126,000 Georgians. And according to the census of 2002, 38,000 Ossetians. So this is a gradual expulsion of national minorities, in this case Ossetians, from Georgia. When Georgia attacked South Ossetia in 1989, more than 100,000 Ossetians were expelled from Georgia, and this is confirmed by the above figures. But the expulsion didn't stop there. In 2008, when there was a subsequent aggression by Georgia against the Republic of South Ossetia, other regions of Georgia lost 20,000 Ossetians. They were expelled. For example, in the Kazbek region of Georgia, there are more than 30 Ossetian villages, representing some 1,500 households. After Georgia's aggression against South Ossetia in 2008, the Georgian leadership forced Ossetians to leave by degrading their living conditions. Starting in 2008, the authorities of Georgia prohibited a return to their homes of members of the Ossetian minority, citizens of Russia and descendants of the Kazakh region of Georgia. So this is a violation of the rights of citizens of Russia on the basis of their ethnic origin. People are not only prevented from visiting their sanctuaries, the graves of their ancestors, but they're also deprived of the right to own their own homes. Today in Georgia, there's not a single Ossetian school, even though there are 14,000 ethnic Ossetians in Georgia. At the same time, in the Leningor region of the Republic of South Ossetia, there are 10 schools, 6 of which are Georgian. In 1 week in those schools, Georgian language and literature is taught for 50 years and Ossetian only for 30. We call on ODIHR to monitor these violations of the rights of national minorities and to assess the actions of Georgia appropriately in order that this practice come to an end. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for framing that clearly. And next I would like to hand the floor to the delegation of Serbia.
Thank you. By adopting the action plan for the negotiation chapter 23, the Republic of Serbia has set a strategic commitment to improving the institutional and legislative framework in the area of basic human and minority rights and freedoms. The action plan for the chapter 23 identifies the need to improve the position of national minorities and provides for a development of a special action plan for the exertion of national minority rights. Even before the adoption of the action plan, we had both a legislative and institutional framework that is above the European average, but in this way we managed to raise the scope and quality of the enforcement of the law in practice, especially in the fields of education, culture, and information. I would like to remind you that after the elections for the National Councils of National Minorities, which were held in November 2018, there are 22 national councils operating in Serbia, as well as the Union of the Jewish Municipalities. In the election cycles of 2010, 2014, and 2018, national councils of national minorities were elected in direct elections, which places Serbia in one of the few states that thus provides conditions for national minorities to elect their representatives. Direct elections for national councils are held in the same fashion as election for the National Assembly. 4 national minorities elected their representatives through the electional assembly: Macedonian, Croatian, Montenegrin, and Russian national minorities. More than 15 million euros has been earmarked for the financing of the work of the national councils of national minorities from 2013 to the present. In order to develop the action plan, a multi-sectoral working group was formed, consisting of relevant state and provincial bodies, representatives of national councils of national minorities, and the representatives of the Council of Europe and the civil society organizations. The action plan has been developed through a broad inclusive process aimed at ensuring the maximum possible level of consensus among all actors and enabling national minorities through their representatives to ensure the highest level of participation in the formulation of this key document for the exercising of national minority rights. In order to make the working group transparent, all meetings were open to representatives of embassies and international organizations. In the coming period, we will take steps to improve interaction between different communities living in Serbia, and we will work to promote intercultural dialogue and mutual understanding. Thank you.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate. This will be the following order: DIVA, Parents for Diversity, followed by International Platform Global Rights of Peaceful People, followed by Association of Central Asian Migrants. DIVA, Parents for Diversity, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. I want to thank you all for the possibility to come. I am from Finland, and I am here very much because lately there has been research made about Finland, and this has shown that the problem of racism and harassment and discrimination is high in Finland. And this affects especially schools. And I would like to recommend the Finnish authorities to look into the process of starting to establish an authority who is supervising the schools, because there is no such in Finland. Our association, DIVA, Parents for Diversity, we work with families to promote diversity in schools and preschools. And we're actively in contact with families, with young people and with children who are being harassed, who are being discriminated in schools. In Finland, civil rights for minorities are formally guaranteed at the state level in the national curriculum for education. But on the level of the municipalities, who are in charge of organizing the schools and providing education, they are practically neglected too often, very often. And I can give an explanation. For example, minority groups like Finland Swedes, who have own schools, they are protected. The same comes to the Jews, who have own school, own preschool, own daycare. Even the Tatars of Finland had that till quite recently. Then we have other groups, like the Sami, the Roma, the Karelian. They go to the normal schools with the majority children, and they have a choice. They assimilate and lose their own identity, or they become outcasted and are discriminated against, like the Romas. Because the schools do not know how to treat minorities. Families from both old and new minorities and families of migrant backgrounds whose children face discrimination in the schools in Finland are left completely alone to fight with municipal authorities in court and taking on financial risk. And this is why we highly recommend a supervising authority for the schools who can sanction the municipalities in Finland. And there is also a written statement. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your remarks. And now I give the floor to International Platform Global Rights of Peaceful People.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Moderator, I want to thank you for giving me the floor and the opportunity to tell you about the life of the indigenous peoples of the Subcarpathian Rus, which is now Transcarpathia in Ukraine. Unfortunately, the Ruthenians have not been recognized by the Ukrainian authorities, despite our efforts. The forefathers of the Ruthenians were Slavic tribes living on the territory of the Carpathian Mountains, that is today's Ukraine, Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary. Ruthenians are an independent people, and in fact, it is said that Ruthenians are an independent, separate Slavic peoples, the fourth Slavic people. The Ruthenians belong to the Rich Pospolita, to the Hungarian Kingdom of Hungary, to Austro-Hungary, to the Russian Empire, to Ukraine, and everywhere they're subjected to assimilation. The Athenians were assimilated in Austro-Hungary, in Czechoslovakia, but it was not imposed, it was not conflictual. However, the situation in Ukraine is similar. And in fact, now many Ruthenians in Ukraine believe themselves to be Ukrainian, even if they still speak Ruthenian. The Ruthenians, and this is the recommendation, want to live in their historical homeland, speak their language, to maintain their cultural traditions and keep the history alive. We hope that the Ruthenians, as a minority, should be recognized by Ukraine. We want for persecution of Ruthenians, including in the media, in Ukraine to cease. We also want a Ruthenian language and literature faculty to be opened in some universities. We want Ruthenians to be able to study their history, their language, their folklore, everything from the Transcarpathian region. Thank you very much, and I'll be submitting a copy of my statement to the Secretariat.
Thank you very much. The speaking order will be as follows. Association of Central Asian Migrants followed by Salut et Miséricorde, followed by the delegation of Tajikistan. Association of Central Asian Migrants.
Thank you, moderator. Dear colleagues, let me start with the recommendations. To stop repression on ethnic grounds and to return legal order to the Gorno-Badakhshan Autonomous Oblast, to provide broadcasting in local languages, to open a legal faculty in the Khorog State University, because the local population is very poorly represented in the courts and the prosecutor's office, and to international donors to provide funds for the development of the Pamir languages. Among the ethnic minorities of Tajikistan, after Uzbeks, the second largest minority are the Pamirs. I'm a Pamir. Now, we have no schools. We have 4 languages and a number of dialects, but those languages are not used. There's no radio, no press, no television. And this means, of course, that these languages are at risk of disappearing. In 2 of those languages, Yazguliam and Ishkashim, the number of people using those languages is less than 10,000 people. So there is a threat of disappearance. I'm a linguist. And I can tell you that free use of our language is not the only problem that we have. The entire Pamir people are subject to discrimination in Tajikistan ever since independence. And young people of my Yazguliam nation are being done away with by the Rahman government. Since the Yazguliams were, and other Pamirs during the civil war, were in the anti-Rahman side, after 2015, when Rahman decided to reject the peace agreement unilaterally, there started to be repression of Yazguliams right across the post-Soviet area. Young people were either imprisoned, where they would lose their health after being treated roughly, or would even be killed off upon detention. Ladies and gentlemen, after last year's September visit by Rahman to the Autonomous Oblast, and his requirement to bring the armed forces into Khorog and to control everything, it's essentially a military siege. Over the first 6 months of this year, 2,500 people have been sentenced to imprisonment. There is full control of any movement by the population in Khorog, and any civil society activists are monitored by the state security apparatus. It has become an unbearable atmosphere. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Salut et miséricorde.
Merci.
Thank you. My recommendation is the following: to review European immigration policies covering Muslim countries, to take into account the warnings sent to us by Christians living in Muslim countries. If I may, I want to speak up for Christians which have become a national minority in Iraq. Specifically, their history should teach us a lesson. The Global Persecution Index 2018, published by the NGO Porte Ouverte, Open Doors, reveals the tragic situation which Christians in Iraq are facing. They're being subjected to extreme persecution, and it is not only the extremists that are subjecting them to this. In fact, the Iraqi government is not protecting them, because, as one Iraqi Christian said, when we contact the authorities, we're forced to actually reveal that we're Christians. However, we're not sure that those from whom we're seeking protection are not one and the same as those who are threatening us. Very often, hate against Christian is fueled in Iraq. Starting in 2015, all non-Muslim children have been compelled to convert to Islam. School curricula represent indigenous Christians as being foreigners, although Iraq was a Christian.
Know whether it relates to the OSCE area? Your remarks. Thank you.
Non, mais je pense
You see, I think that it's possible that there's a link for the OSCE, taking into account of the situation in the Middle East, where Christians are now a minority. So, if I may, I'm going to continue, and stop me if you need to.
Thank you.
The Iraqi government, as I was saying, is compelling Christian children to convert to Islam. If Christian children say that they believe in Jesus in schools, and this is the Christian Post reporting, they are beaten and humiliated. I also have the witness statement of a priest, Mr. Douglas Albazi. He's a priest in Erbil. And he's covered in scars because he was subjected to torture, in fact. He says that I'm proud of being an Iraqi. I love my country, but my country doesn't want to have anything to do with me. What's happening to my people is a genocide. I beg you, don't call it a conflict. It's a genocide.
Thank you very much for your remarks. And now I will hand the floor to the delegation of Tajikistan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. In Tajikistan, there are representatives of various ethnic groups and nationalities, and recognizing their rights is a sine qua non condition for democracy and for social stability in the Republic. The Republic of Tajikistan considers that it is very important for various ethnic groups, languages, and faiths to be treated on an equal footing. There are various documents, international documents, combating racism and discrimination, the Framework Convention, the protocols to that, and in its national policy, the government of Tajikistan applies those standards. On a regular basis, we submit reports to various international organizations, and there are also various national plans to develop full equality. The Constitution prohibits any form of discrimination on the basis of race, language, or faith, and all groups living in the Republic have the right to use their own mother tongues. There are appropriate conditions provided for the choice of the language of education. The Uzbek, Turkmen, and Russian languages, as well as others, are used in the schools. There are even special schools for refugees from Afghanistan. Officially, we have more than 25 ethnic associations. And it is also important that ethnic groups be able to contribute to decision-making at the top level. There are representatives of ethnic groups in the parliament and at various levels of the civil service. In the Republic of Tajikistan, we have a lot of information gathering about the use of languages when it comes to schools. Some are in Russian, some in Tajik, some in Uzbek, some are used several languages. And furthermore, in the media, broadcasting in different languages is also possible. When it comes to religions, there are appropriate conditions afforded to Christians, Jews, and others. They are able to practice their religions. Now, the new political climate since independence has made it possible for us to develop all of the necessary conditions for full assurance of the principle of full equality among all ethnic groups, religions, and faiths. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate for his remarks. The speaking order will be as follows. Bewegung gleicher Möglichkeiten für alle, followed by Regional Center of New Information Technologies, followed by the delegation of Azerbaijan. Bewegung gleicher Möglichkeiten für alle.
Mr. Moderator, colleagues, equal opportunities for all. Over the last few days, we heard about a new state, the Republic of Pakistan. I'm sure that many of you hadn't heard of it yet, but there is such a sovereign republic, which is part of the Republic of Uzbekistan. The paradox is that the Republic of Pakistan is a sovereign republic within a sovereign republic. That is the Republic of Uzbekistan. In 1993, an agreement was signed, a 20-year agreement regarding the entry of the Republic of Pakistan into the Republic of Uzbekistan. The 20 years is up, so we need to resolve this issue. Colleagues already spoke to this topic, telling us about the persecution the locals are subjected to in the Republic of Pakistan, simply because of who they are. I believe that the statements made were somewhat politicized. In fact, we're all facing the same problems. The Uzbeks, the Karakol Pakistanis, they're seeing their rights trampled. What they want, in fact, is independence, and that's their right. So we need to organize a referendum. At that referendum, a decision will be taken. Representatives of the official delegation of Uzbekistan should not ignore the issue. It's far too important for that. We need to come to grips with this issue to accept it. In 2016, in Uzbekistan, there was a coup assisted by the Kremlin. Since then, the situation has deteriorated substantively. In Uzbekistan in particular, we've seen a policy of Russification imposed. We've got Russian media spewing propaganda. As a result, the Uzbeks are now a national minority. We cannot lead fulfilling lives. We don't have many of our rights, and the color of the passport has changed. It used to be green, and now it's a maroon color, just like the Russian one. Isn't that interesting? We need to stop this process in their tracks, because the migrants outside Uzbekistan were being stripped of our citizenship. Our citizenship is being revoked because we have our own opinions, independent opinions. We need to put an end to this, and we need for the international community to draw attention to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Regional Center of New Information Technologies. Do we have a representative of Regional Center of New Information Technologies? In that case, we'll move on to the delegation of Azerbaijan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Azerbaijan respects the rights of persons belonging to national minorities to participate in public affairs, including participation in the affairs relating to the protection and promotion of their identity. Azerbaijan protects their rights within the framework of its multiculturalism policy. Presently, there are about 30 ethnic groups in Azerbaijan. Rights and freedoms of national minorities are protected in the constitution. For the first time in the post-Soviet space, Azerbaijan adopted the law titled Protection of Rights and Freedom of National Minorities Living in the Republic of Azerbaijan, states support to development of their language and culture. Furthermore, the Republic of Azerbaijan is a party to international conventions on protection of national minorities. The Azerbaijani government gives special significance to projects aimed to socio-economic developments of regions inhabited mostly by national minorities. For that purpose, the presidential decrees and state programs on socio-economic development of regions inhabited mostly by national minorities were adopted. There are many organizations and cultural centers of national minorities functioning in Azerbaijan. These organizations play a very important role in the solution of socio-economic and cultural issues of national minorities, as well as in their integration into society. The government of Azerbaijan sponsors radio broadcasts in Kurdish, Lezgin, Talysh, Georgian, Armenian, and Russian. There are above 340 comprehensive Russian schools, 10 comprehensive Georgian schools, and also schools in languages of such minorities as Hebrew, Lezgin, Talysh, Avar, Sahur, Udi, Kurdish, Khinalik. The Department of Interethnic Relations, Multiculturalism, and Religious Issues initiated the teaching of the course titled Introduction to Multiculturalism. There are above 90 NGOs, national centers, dealing with socio-economic and cultural issues of national minorities. These organizations have been applied for financial aid to support issues related to national minorities. These projects are aimed to preserve cultural heritage of national minorities, support their activities of communities, and sponsor anniversary events. Thank you for your attention.
Thank the distinguished delegate. The speaking order will be as follows. Qarais Islamic Religious Community in Italy, followed by Catalan National Assembly ANC, followed by Yazidi Center for Human Rights. Quraish Islamic Religious Community in Italy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. My recommendation as the president of the Islamic religious community Quraish in Italy is to stress the respect and non-discrimination of a national minority as the Muslim minority in Italy, without double standards or juridical boycotts or the use of a lack of political will. We cannot fail to report a discriminatory intention against Islam, especially by the recent governments within Italy as a whole and against Quraish in particular. It is a clear violation of religious rights in obvious infringement of human rights. Certain legislative initiatives by two regions, including the regional anti-mosque laws of Lombardy and of Veneto, also represent an unequivocal discriminatory intention against an entire religious community. It is particularly serious that, as things stand, the Islamic entities in Italy are denied in effect and without further explanation not only the possibility of obtaining an accord called intesa, but also simply the possibility of obtaining legal recognition as a corporate bodies for religion so that they can become legal subjects. Such a recognition, in fact, does not require the applicant entity to be the only contact representing the entire Islamic community, but simply that the entity is representative of itself and passes the checks required by law. Furthermore, recognition cannot be reconsidered as something to be granted or otherwise on the basis of arbitrary assessments that are unlikely to be checked by anyone. On the contrary, we believe it represents a right for everyone who makes a legitimate request for it. From the combined reading of Article 1 and 2 of the law on admitted religions, one can clearly see that the non-exceptional but ordinary nature of this recognition granted to many bodies of different types and denominations, including some belonging to the same religious denomination. The law requires only that faith other than Catholicism should not profess principles or follow rituals contrary to public order or good practice. And the next article states the possibility of being established as legal entities. Therefore, the refusal to grant recognition to Quraish also does not seem legitimate, considering that it fulfills all the conditions required for the purpose. With reference to all the efforts made, there is clearly a lack of political will, which for over 20 years, regardless of the political parties in government, has managed to undermine any initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, and apologies for the last-minute interruption. Next on my list, I have Catalan National Assembly, ANC. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to talk about threats to public participation of Catalan people and to urge the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities to turn the attention of his office to this critical situation. In October 2017, following independence referendum, the Parliament of Catalonia was suspended and dissolved, and the executive was taken over by the Spanish government. While the institutions have been somewhat restored, the actions of the Spanish state since October 2017 have fundamentally undermined the right to public participation of the Catalan minority. For instance, on European Parliament elections in May 2019, 2.3 million voters voted for the list Junts per Europa and Ahora Repúblicas, led by Carles Puigdemont, Toni Comín and Oriol Junqueras, in exile and in pre-trial detention, respectively. Spain's electoral board has not allowed these three elected MEPs to take up their seats in the European Parliament. This follows the suspension of Catalan members of Spanish Parliament and also of the Catalan Parliament. Most of the people who voted for them are members of the Catalan minority, including many youngsters, who as a result are not being represented by the chosen delegates in these institutions. By doing this, Spain has violated the right to vote and the right of public and political participation of more than 2 million members of the Catalan minority. Spain has also used criminal law to coerce the Catalan minority into not voicing their political opinions. In April 2018, United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression urged the Spanish authorities to refrain pursuing criminal charge of rebellion against political figures and protesters belonging to the Catalan minority and involved in the independence referendum. In early 2019, the UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues stated that non-violent political dissent by minorities should not give rise to criminal charges, and joined the concerns of the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression. Against those warnings, in June this year, in its findings related to the trials of the Catalan independence leader, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detentions stated that the purpose of the criminal charge and the resulting trial is to coerce them on account on the political opinions they have expressed. Similarly, just yesterday, 10 pro-independence activists were arrested under anti-terrorist law related to their planned demonstrations for when the judgments are issued in the trial of the Catalan leaders. As with many other cases with this law, they do not appear to be any true indications that violent actions were being planned. The improper use of anti-terrorism law and other high crimes has a chilling effect on public participation, and many Catalans are increasingly afraid to engage in public life. For all these reasons, the Catalan National Assembly calls Spanish authorities to respect, protect, and promote the rights of the Catalan minority, including the right to self-determination, and on the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities to visit Catalonia and report on the situation there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your remarks. At this point, I'd like to request that if any delegations of participating states would like to exercise their right to reply, and they haven't already registered in the desk behind me, could they please do so now? The speaking order will be as follows. Yazidi Center for Human Rights, followed by the delegation of Hungary, followed by the delegation of Armenia. Yazidi Center for Human Rights.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, despite the fact that there are 11 national minorities in Armenia, the government representatives always describe the country as a mono-ethnic one, which is a way of denial of the presence of national minorities and protection of their rights. Moreover, creating government supporting so-called community leaders and giving them media access, the government created a myth that Armenia is the best country in the world for national minorities to live. As a result of this propaganda and because of lack of minority rights-oriented educational programs, national minorities have lost their motivation to defend their rights, as a result of which national minorities start to lose their identity and assimilation process started among them. Government doesn't try to liberalize national minorities and fight against harmful traditions like early marriages among the national minorities. Police representatives don't open or don't bring the criminal cases to the court when early marriage cases by national minorities happen. The majority of Yazidi children, especially girls, don't receive basic education and don't graduate schools. The government doesn't try to guarantee the right to receive education, saying that not receiving education is so-called Yazidi tradition, and the government has nothing to do with that. National minorities' participation in social, political, economic life of the country is not meaningful and is more symbolic. One example of that is the draft law on national minorities, which is more about declaration and doesn't provide any mechanism to realize their rights to save their identity and not to be discriminated. Because of the hate speech and discrimination, especially against the Yazidi community, several cases happen when property, especially the land belonging Yazidis, have been illegally taken from them. One example of that is the case of Ferik village, when past mayor of Yazidi populated Ferik village, who was ethnic Armenian, illegally have sold all the agricultural lands belonging to Yazidi village to one of Armenian oligarchs and past ruling party representatives, Mambel Grigorian relatives. As a result of which, Yazidi population of the village is on the edge now of emigration, because this land was the only mean how they could earn money and live. To solve these issues, we recommend to create national strategy of the protection of the rights of national minorities, fight against harmful tradition, create mechanisms for Yazidi children to receive education, and investigate cases where national minorities have been discriminated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'll pass the floor to the delegation of Hungary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. While supporting the EU statement, let me add some remarks in my national capacity. The issue of national minorities is fundamental when we deal with the European peace and stability. The documents adopted in the past for the regulation of this field are very important. This is the reason why I think it is unfortunate that the two basic legal instruments adopted by the Council of Europe are not specified in the EU declaration. However, we should also take into account that these conventions are compulsory but not enforceable documents. Generally speaking, I consider that little progress in the field of national minority protection has been achieved in the past years. In order to avoid setbacks or to prevent progressive weakening of the results of the 90s, it is an urgent need to establish a compulsory framework regulation in the EU, which could serve as an example for EU neighborhood too. We recommend 5 basic principles to be considered and used for formulating the national minority protection framework of the EU. Firstly, the issue of national minorities is not an internal question but a European one. The European states and institutions should deal with the situation and rights of autochthonous national minorities, since this is one of the prerequisites of European peace and stability. The basic element of national minority protection is the safeguard of right to identity. It derives from the protection of human dignity and represents the basis of national minority protection. Third, since identity has individual and collective dimensions, both individual and collective rights should be ensured. The often highlighted and promoted need for integration into majority society leads to assimilation for sure without collective rights. Fourth, national identity and citizenship are separate notions, but they are not necessarily antagonistic ones. Fifth, the autochthonous national minorities living on a certain territory should be considered as constituent elements of the state. Since they have been living on the same territory for centuries, they created values, thus contributing to the development of the state regardless of their respective political powers. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate. And now I pass the floor to the delegation of Armenia.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Protection of national minorities is one of the priorities of the government of Armenia. And I would like particularly to bring to the attention of the speaker who just spoke about Yazidi minority issues, that we are convinced that political, social, cultural, and economic participation is key to empowering national minorities and encouraging their genuine and inclusive integration into society. In line with this approach, 4 seats in the National Assembly of Armenia have been permanently assigned to 4 major national minorities: Yazidis, Russians, Assyrians, and Kurds. We believe that cooperation and streamlining of the activities and efforts of various organizations on issues related to national minorities would be beneficial both in terms of results and resources. Armenia currently is preparing its next periodic report on implementation of the Council of Europe Framework Convention on Protection of National Minorities. We are pleased to note that the progress achieved by Armenia in its efforts to improve the access to minority language education in schools, such as Assyrian, Kurdish, and Yazidi, has been recognized in the Council of Europe and commended. Mr. Moderator, unfortunately we continue to witness the rise of inflammatory language in the political discourse targeting ethnic groups. Special attention should be paid to hate speech, intolerance, xenophobia, racial and ethnic profiling, glorification of hate crimes, especially led and encouraged by political leaders, as they serve as clear early warning signs of potential atrocity crimes. And one additional remark, the report on national minorities in Azerbaijan, which was released this February by Council of Europe Advisory Committee, on the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities expresses particular concern regarding the persistent hostile narrative against Armenia, constituting hate speech against Armenians as an ethnic group. In conclusion, I would like to recommend ODIHR better utilize its early warning mandate to react and report on cases of state-led hostile narratives targeting ethnic minorities. I thank you.
Thank you very much to the distinguished delegate. We've concluded the sign-up list. We have time for two speakers from the reserve list at a time of 2 minutes each, because we have a very tight time schedule. It will be Kyrgyzstan followed by Albania. Kyrgyzstan, the floor is yours. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, the Kyrgyz Republic is a state with more than 100 ethnic groups represented. We have introduced appropriate measures to ensure tolerance and non-discrimination. Our constitution has set out the standards for treatment of ethnic groups, and we, in fact, apply administrative and even criminal liability should they be violated. No one can suffer discrimination because of race, disability, ethnic origin, religion, or in fact any other factors. And we are working hard to develop and improve our anti-discrimination legislation. In the rules followed by local governments and by the federal civil service, these principles are enshrined. Various events are organized at the local level to reduce inter-ethnic conflict to a minimum. We are the only country in the region where we have reserved seats in the highest legislative assembly reserved for ethnic groups. And various other measures are being taken to increase the participation of representatives of ethnic groups in the socio-political life of the country. The leaders of the Republic have provided guarantees for the preservation of ethnic minority languages. And a current plan is being worked on with the support of the High Commissioner for National Minorities further to develop these measures. Tolerance and non-discrimination are firmly rooted and enshrined in our basic text, and we are always prepared to cooperate with the OSCE to ensure even further improvement of tolerance and non-discrimination in our society.
Thank you to the distinguished representative, and now I hand the floor to Albania.
As the time of reply to answer to some issues raised here by so-called non-governmental organizations. Albania strongly believes that protection of human rights, including rights of national minorities, is crucial not only internally but also for maintaining regional peace and stability. We consider the national minorities living in Albania as precious value of our society, which has been traditionally characterized by harmony, coexistence, and tolerance. Rights of persons belonging to minorities are guaranteed by the Constitution and domestic laws in line with European standards, including framework conventions of Council of Europe. Albania has positive records of appreciation by international community, including European Union, Council of Europe, OSCE. The rights of self-identification is provided by the law and it's adopted by laws. By now there are 7 of them and 7 are in process, based on the subjective criteria of self-identification and the objective criteria. This is a widely applied practice which ensures human rights and accuracy of the process. Albanian government is committed to the protection of human rights, in particular to further implement anti-discrimination policies, improve social policies with special focus on marginalized groups and minors, as well as reforms in the area of property rights. The property rights is constitutional right that enjoy all citizens individually, indiscriminately, and equally regardless of nationality. Access to the rights of national minorities can only be ensured in a society where dialogue, understanding, and cultural diversity are seen as sources of values of coexistence. In this regard, our country has a permanent commitment to the promotion and protection of the right of minorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've now concluded the interventions and we will move on to the right of replies. On my list, I have 14 rights of replies. There will be 1 minute exactly each. I ask you to stay strictly within that time, please. The order is as follows: Greece, Georgia, France, Estonia, Latvia, Romania, Spain, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, United States of America, Finland, Italy, Canada, and Netherlands on behalf of the EU. The delegation of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In reply to one rather repetitive NGO statement, I would like to recall that the Muslim minority in Thrace consists of 3 distinct groups whose members are of Turkish, Pomak, and Roma origin, having the Muslim faith as their common denominator. We fully respect the principle of individual self-identification. What is not acceptable is the attempt to establish a single ethnic identity for the entire Muslim minority in Thrace, so as to subsume Pomak and Roma persons under a Turkish identity which is not their own. As far as minority education is concerned, there are 123 minority elementary schools in Thrace, hosting more than 4,500 minority students. There are also about 40 public kindergartens in minority villages in Thrace. We firmly believe that it is of paramount importance for minority children to learn the language of the country in which they are living in order for them to be active members of the society. A written statement will be, I will circulate a written statement later with the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, and now I pass the floor to Georgia.
Thank you. Bearing in mind the time limit, I will only reply the sum of many accusations voiced by the Sandisan and Ossetia accusers. Representative of Sandisan and Ossetia accusers repeatedly claim that Georgia prohibits freedom of movement of ethnic Ossetians. In fact, there is absolutely no limitation for the freedom of movement imposed by Georgia. The only restriction is the artificial barrier created by the occupation regime. In fact, as we speak, all the so-called crossing point at the occupation line in Trin Valley region are closed, cutting the communities on both sides. As for the education, NGOs claim that there are Georgian schools in Akhalgori, which is also incorrect. Starting from 2017, the instruction in all 6 Georgian language schools in Akhalgori has been replaced with the Russian language, and teaching in Georgia has been banned up to 5th grade. I would like also to echo the claim that Georgia invaded in 2008, incorrect, when in fact that we witnessed Russia's full-scale military invasion followed by occupation of Abkhazia and Trin Valley region. With regard to person forcefully exiled by the USSR, Georgia has already fulfilled its commitment undertaking upon accession to the COE. It was also noted by the co-reporters of the Council of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, and I pass the floor to France.
Merci, monsieur. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I should like to exercise the right of reply in response to the organization Unis dans la diversité. As per Article 1 of the French Constitution, the French Republic is indivisible, and the official language is French. These principles underpin, in fact, go against the recognition of collective rights. However, we can, of course, maintain our cultural heritage and ensure that regional languages take pride of place as per Article 75/11, which enshrines the protection of cultural heritage. The recognition of regional languages in the Constitution attests to the fact that we're committed to our heritage, and this is something we're going to be granting to national authority, local authorities as well. Local authorities can now use the tools they deem necessary in order to respond to local requests. However, we're against the use of regional languages in schools and in their use in the media.
Thank you very much, and I pass the floor to Estonia.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Estonia would like to exercise the right of reply and respond shortly to some misleading remarks presented in this panel's working session. The Estonian government has been very open about the topic of undetermined citizenship and has worked continuously over the decades to increase citizenship through naturalization. The number of persons with undetermined citizenship has decreased remarkably from 32% of the population in 1992 to 6% in 2019. The persons with undetermined citizenship have travel documents, residence permits, right to equal treatment, and access to social services, as well as the right to vote at local elections. In addition, residents with undetermined citizenship can travel visa-free to both the EU and Russia. Let me remind you that citizenship may not be forced on anyone, and that everyone has the right to choose his or her citizenship. The people who have chosen to apply for Estonian citizenship acquire Estonian citizenship according to the requirements specified in the Citizenship Act 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I pass the floor to Latvia.
Dear moderator, in reply to the Russian Federation and the representatives of the civil society, I have the following remarks. Latvia's constitution and laws guarantee and protect the rights of persons belonging to national minorities so that they can preserve and develop their language as well as their ethnic and cultural identity. A comprehensive reform of the education system is currently taking place in Latvia. The reform is aimed at the modernization of the curriculum and teaching methods for the benefit of children and young people at all ages and stages of education. Transition to a larger proportion of instruction in the state language is an inherent part of the said reform process. The principal aim is to ensure that all school graduates have equal command of the Latvian language for a successful and competitive entry into labor market in Latvia or for the continuation of their studies. Referring to Latvia's non-citizens as stateless persons is completely unfounded. Citizens are in no way stateless in the meaning of the Convention on the Status of Stateless Persons, and UNHCR has acknowledged this in various publications. Thank you.
Thank you. Next I have Romania.
Thank you, moderator. We wish to exercise our right to reply as regards the assertions made during this session regarding the access to education in the mother tongue in Romania. We wish to firstly state that Romania is fully committed to ensuring the access to education in the mother tongue. The law on education has a special chapter on the education of persons belonging to national minorities. They have the right to study in their mother tongue at all levels and forms of education. Romanian Ministry of National Education is constantly working on ensuring quality education while promoting the democratic citizenship and the respect of fundamental values. According to the Romanian legislation, pupils belonging to national minorities may study all disciplines in their mother tongue except for the Romanian language and literature. As to the allocation of resources, we wish to point out that for the current school year, the highest number of textbooks for pupils studying in the minority languages has been published. A Secretary of State dedicated to ensuring educational rights of persons belonging to national minorities is currently active within the Ministry of Education, and there is a continuous dialogue with the organizations of persons belonging to national minorities regarding educational policies. Organizations of persons belonging to national minorities have participated in all the debates related to the strategy on education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to note also that we've added Ukraine to the list of right to reply. Next on the speaking list is Spain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Mr. Roman. I would like to utilizar el derecho de réplica para la intervención.
I would like to use my right of reply to respond to what was said by the representative of the National Assembly, the Assembly of Catalan. Let me first of all say a few general points. Spain is the largest decentralized country in the world, and it's not a Spanish representative who said that. I mean, it's an index, it's a ranking. We are extremely decentralized. We're 26th when it comes to democracy, according to the annual democracy report. And according to Freedom House, it is one of the top countries when it comes to ensuring fundamental freedoms. Now, in Spain, the constitution does not recognize the right of regions to practice self-determination. This is true of most constitutions in the world, in fact. Furthermore, the majority of Catalans would not agree to separation because only 47% of Catalans were in favor of independence of Catalonia. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you very much. We have 9 right of replies left in 3 minutes. I give the floor to Uzbekistan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to exercise our right of reply in order to respond to the statement made by the representative of Equal Opportunities for All. Uzbekistan is undergoing dynamic development, including in Karakalpakstan. There are no restrictions in place there. In fact, statements made by individuals do not represent the opinion of the population of Karakalpakstan. Often, in fact, these statements directly contradict their opinions. All civic rights are being respected as per our legislation. By way of conclusion, I'd like to call on the representative of this NGO to stop making groundless accusations directed at our president elected following free elections, which were fully in line with international standards, with international observers present.
Thank you, moderator. In Tajikistan, has been noted the rights of all national minorities, religions, faiths, and language groups are guaranteed in accordance with international standard. The state provides all the necessary conditions for those groups to develop. Any discrimination on the basis of race or other factors is criminally liable. And in the Constitution and in other basic laws, guarantees are provided, including representation in the parliament and other bodies of the state. We have a humanitarian sciences faculty at the National University where all languages are studied. There is a record kept of all written local traditions, and it is possible for any language group to obtain access to the mass media. Now, of course, there are always vulnerable groups in the population, and sometimes radical terrorist and extremist organizations try to take advantage of this, but we as a state need to combat such negative trends. Thank you.
And the United States of America.
Mr. Moderator, for our right of reply, we've heard quite a bit here today concerning the situation of members of national minorities in Crimea. In fact, I've listened to all of the statements here today, and anyone can see the pattern. It appears that the issue of national minorities is being weaponized against Ukraine, and for that matter, all the Baltic states too, and other sovereign countries of Europe. Many of the statements seem to attempt to justify the occupation and purported annexation of Crimea. Let's be clear, Crimea is under Russian occupation. If you would like to know more about the situation in Crimea, may I invite you personally to a side event tomorrow at lunch where you can hear genuine Crimean voices talking about the ongoing abuses on that peninsula.
Thank you very much. And now I hand the floor to Finland.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As Finland was mentioned in the statement by one of the civil society representatives, I would like to exercise my right of reply, and will you please state the following regarding our education system. The objective of the Finnish general education is to guarantee that every child, pupil and student, irrespective of their ethnic origin, background or wealth, have equal possibilities and rights to education of high quality that is free of charge. The services must be equally and equitably accessible to everyone. As for the division of labor between different authorities in our education system, The Finnish National Agency for Education is a central actor in the development of education and the execution of education policy. The municipalities are then responsible for providing basic education for all children in their area. Education providers are guided with legislative objectives and the national core curricula. I would also like to mention that in Finnish schools we have since a few years implemented an anti-bullying program called Kiva Koulu. No one can be bullied or excluded on the basis of ethnic background or other rations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hand the floor to Italy.
Thank you. In response to the statement by Italian Islamic religious community COREIS, I would like to state the following. The Italian Constitution guarantees all fundamental and inalienable rights of the human person, of which freedom of religion and worship is great part. All individuals in Italy can profess their religion or no religion at all without suffering any discrimination in the enjoyment of their civil and political rights. All religious denominations benefit of equal liberty of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of organization, freedom of worship. In particular, the Italian Constitution provides specific articles on religious matters. These are Article 3, 8, 19, and 20. I will not go through them because of lack of time. The remarks of the President of COREIS, including those on the legal recognition of COREIS as a faith entity and some legislative initiative by 2 Italian regions, will be of course brought to the attention of relevant Italian authorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and now I pass the floor to Canada.
Thank you very much. In response to the references made by Russia to Canada's Indigenous people, let me reiterate that the Government of Canada is committed to renewing the relationship with Indigenous peoples based on recognition, respect, cooperation, and partnership. The recognition and implementation of the rights of Indigenous peoples are central to advancing the vital work of reconciliation in Canada. We recognize that for too long, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children have faced systemic barriers that have made it difficult for them to access the services they need. Canada is working with these groups to eliminate these barriers and help give children in these communities the good education, quality healthcare, and culturally relevant social support they need to succeed. The Government of Canada has also acknowledged the systemic causes of violence against Indigenous women and girls and is addressing them, including through the report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, which we have welcomed. Regarding the call by Russia for the HCNM to monitor the situation in Canada, we would recall that the Indigenous peoples of Canada are not national minorities, and we do not believe that HCNM's mandate would apply to Canada's Indigenous people. We do, however, welcome the international community's ongoing involvement in advancing the rights of Indigenous people around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, and now I have Netherlands on behalf of the EU.
Thank you. I would like to exercise the right of reply on behalf of the EU. In reply to some remarks made during the session, we would like to reiterate our well-known position on the illegal annexation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol by the Russian Federation. We did not, do not, and will not recognize it. We regret that attempts by some speakers to use a legitimate opportunity for discussion and dialogue to make points relating to a situation that is in contradiction with Helsinki principles. We also regret the attempts to whitewash the human rights situation in Crimea. Again, they have not succeeded. We remain deeply concerned about the dire situation of human rights and fundamental freedoms on the peninsula since its illegal annexation by Russia. We call again for full compliance with international human rights standards in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, as well as for the full and unrestricted access to the peninsula for the SMM, OSCE institutions, as well as for all international human rights monitoring missions and human rights NGOs. In reply to the intervention regarding the EU sanctions policy, we remind that since March 2014, the EU has progressively imposed restrictive measures against Russia, and that these measures were adopted in response to the illegal annexation of Crimea and the deliberate destabilization of Ukraine. In addition, finally, in reply to some remarks regarding the conflict between Russia and Georgia of August 2008, we reiterate our firm support for the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Georgia within its internationally recognized borders, as well as the policy of non-recognition and engagement concerning the Georgian regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next I have Ukraine, who will be followed by Azerbaijan. Ukraine.
Thank you, Andrei Yurash, Director of the Department for Religious Affairs and Nationalities. We feel misery for the Russian delegation that misused control representatives of the national and religious minorities to promote disinformation and propaganda at this meeting. Also, we would like to stress that after acceptance of the new law on education and receiving as a consequence recommendations of the Viennese Commission, Ukraine completely implemented all these recommendations. Firstly, Ukraine has prolonged the time of implementation of the law till 2023. Secondly, the special law on the secondary education has been prepared and adopted in first reading for clarification some points of the already functioning law on the education. So, any statement that Ukraine refuses to follow the recommendations of the Viennese Commission is an absolute incorrectness or even more, the conscious lie. After the Russian occupation of the Crimea, intensive migration of the Crimean Tatars from the peninsula, in the place of mass settlement of Crimean Tatar, in one city was found in the new special secondary school for the Crimean Tatars students with around 300 students in this school. So it's evidence that Ukraine developing the system of the education on the languages of the national minorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last minute registration from Azerbaijan.
In response to the representative of Armenian delegation, I would like to note that Azerbaijan is one of a few states in the world in which multiculturalism is state policy. This policy is directed to protect ethnocultural values of all national minorities living in the country. As I told, there are above 30 nationalities in Azerbaijan. One of them are Armenians. Like other national minorities, they enjoy equal rights, and there are, for instance, TV and radio programs. Unlike Armenia, which destroyed mosques and other religious objects of Muslims in the occupied Nagorno-Karabakh territory of Azerbaijan, in the center of Baku, you will find Armenian church reconstructed by the government of Azerbaijan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And another registration from Armenia.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'll be very brief. I firmly reject the ungrounded and protracted accusations just aired here by the delegation of Azerbaijan, which we have addressed on many occasions. And here, Azerbaijan delegation depicts its country as depicts a country that respects the rights of national minorities, including the rights of the Armenian minorities. But in this regard, let me refer to the report of the ECRI, the International Monitoring Body of the Council of Europe, which mentions that an entire generation of Azerbaijanis has now grown up listening constant rhetoric of Armenians being number one enemy of Azerbaijan. As a result, the Armenians living in the country need to hide their ethnic affiliation, and there is no organization of Armenian minority in Azerbaijan. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I had intended at this point to give the floor back to our expert introducer, but I'm afraid, given the time, we will just have to thank her instead. We really enjoyed your topic and your very thoughtful introduction. To thank all the participants for their participation in this and for keeping to the time limits as far as possible, and the interpreters for their indulgence with the time. Thank you very much.
And the interpreters thank the moderator for his kind words.
We would be starting the side event in 15 minutes, so people who are dressers are kindly asked to stay. The side event will be here in 15 minutes.
One, two. Food will be bring here. Drinks are outside. We can say that, and we will begin in 10 minutes. Okay. You can announce.
Benim şeyim var, slaytlarım var, şeyler, resimler falan var.
Başkan, şunu kaldıralım. Justement, je vais essayer de régler ça. Biz başlayacağız. Şuraya yerini al, şeyi dengeleyeyim ben. Tamam. Bunları kaldırın çantaları. Başı, that's your bag?
Yes, please. Just put it here. Yes, it's okay here.
Sen de bak aynı masaya kalacaksın. Tabii ki. Muhammed, can you sit? Damarine mi? Ben mi oturayım?
We need a lady here.
Yaser de gelecek. Siz böyle olmamış. Yaser şöyle biraz salın. Şeyde alalım. Diğerleri tamam, sen çok köşedesin. Burada iyi. Çünkü Yaser de gelecek. Senin you can can tell that.
Yeah. We are going to start the side event in 5-6 minutes. There will be food here and drinks, coffee and tea will be outside. So I would request the guests who want to attend the side event to come closer so that we can see you and you can see us and listen very carefully what the speakers are going to say. So in 5 minutes we're going to start.
Arkadaşlar yiyecek içeri geliyor, içecekler salon önünde servis ediliyor. O bizim zaten şeyimiz. Onları alıp gelelim. Sandviçler de birazdan gelecek. Masamıza alabiliriz toplantı esnasında. Yes, tu vas venir t'asseoir tout à l'heure, hein, mais c'est comme tu veux. De toute façon, on commence dans 10 minutes.
Because you're the first speaker. Do you want to be the last?
No, he's not the first.
Okay, just a minute. We make it now. Where's my pen?
It's here.
Yeah.
Yasser is the first. Tu veux faire après?
Okay. So, Yasser is the first.
No, I think
He wants to be the last.
not
Third. Okay.
no,
So I think we should start with
Mohammed.
Where's Mohammed? Yeah.
Mohammed is good.
Yeah. Okay.
And two you can put Bengi. Three is Yasser, four is Chelebi, and you can finish with Roman.
Yes.
Good.
Should we start?
Başlamıyoruz çünkü yemek yok, aç karnına toplamadı, toplantı mı? Yok parasını
Sesim geliyor mu?